Chapter 78, Heading in the Opposite Direction. When Dumbledore finished speaking, he sank back into his seat and exchanged a few hushed words with Professor McGonagall. The great hall erupted in cheers and applause. Students leapt to their feet and surged toward the double doors, pouring into the entrance hall. Harry and his friends wove against the tide, making their way to the staff table where Lupin was standing. "Professor Lupin, congratulations!" Harry called out, smiling. He spotted Tom Riddle nearby and, with Dumbledore so close at hand, felt sure Riddle posed no danger. Lupin gave him a worried look. "I don't think now is the time for you to get involved, Harry." Funny, Harry realized they were both thinking the same thing. When Snape appeared beside Lupin, his sallow face contorted with tension. The defense professor's right hand slipped inside his robes, fingers brushing the hilt of his wand. Their combined concern for Harry was palpable. "What about me? I'm a professor at Hogwarts, too," Riddle protested in a delicate voice, shooting Harry an offended glance. Any onlooker would have thought he felt slighted. Snape's eyes flicked back to Harry. "Stay away from that boy," he snarled, his pale face revealing more fear than anger. "Severus, you really make me sad, you know. I died because of you." Tom Riddle's voice was velvety, almost amused, as he studied Severus's face. The smile he wore didn't reach his eyes. There was something else behind it, something calculating. In truth, Riddle had been far too busy, poring over Muggle science, plotting humiliating lessons for the Ministry of Magic, and re-establishing contact with old followers. Only now had he finally unraveled the last threads of that long-buried prophecy. He'd learned, at long last, that Harry Potter housed a shard of his own soul, and that Albus Dumbledore was bent on protecting the boy. With that knowledge finally in hand, Voldemort could afford to be relaxed, even playful. His question to Severus had been born out of idle curiosity, a subtle test. "Your bloodline, your talent, it must have been what drew me to the Potter family in the first place," he mused softly. "And yet, you still faltered." Severus's gaze hardened. He said nothing, but Riddle pressed on, sensing a disturbance in the younger wizard's composure. "You've always been abnormal, Severus," he continued. "I thought perhaps your oddities confirmed my suspicions about why the prophecy pointed to Potter. Yet it seems I was mistaken. What Riddle didn't know was that Severus Snape had indeed set those events into motion years ago by whispering to him the words of Professor Trelawney's prophecy. Severus had borne the weight of that betrayal for countless nights. His conscience shuddered behind layers of self-made secrecy. Every day of his double life had been an agony, yet he'd never let a flicker of remorse reach his face. And now, as Riddle watched the faintest shadow of guilt cross Severus's expression, the Dark Lord found himself unsettled, questioning everything he thought he understood. For a moment, the infamous villain fell silent, uncertain whether he was facing a loyal Death Eater, a double agent, or something far more dangerous still. "Severus, relax. This is Harry Potter, Dumbledore's favorite student after all, and you know how loyal I am to Albus." Tom Riddle offered a polite smile, but his eyes glittered with something colder. "I won't keep you long. There'll be plenty of time to talk later. Harry, you do well to think harder than anyone else." With that, he gave Harry one last calculating look, then melted into the crowd. "Well," Lupin said dryly, "you'd best be on your way, Harry. I'm not sure what you're planning." Snape stood silent, motionless as a statue. On the walk to the Ravenclaw common room, Ron could no longer contain himself. "Harry, what were you thinking back there? How could you even—" "How could I?" Harry cut in, pressing his fingers to his forehead. He wasn't as naive as he looked. After 2 direct encounters, first with one Voldemort, then with another, he'd started to piece together a shocking truth. Part of Voldemort's heart now beat inside him. Thanks to his mother's protective magic, that dark fragment had grafted itself onto his own soul. And whenever he'd faced real danger, whether it was Voldemort himself or the cursed locket, the hidden heart had pulsed, flooding him with strength. He met Ron's wide-eyed stare. "I just wanted to be absolutely sure," he said quietly. Professor Lupin introduced the unfamiliar young man with a courteous nod, but it was the new Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, Tom Riddle, who stepped forward to greet Harry directly. As Riddle closed the distance between them, Harry felt a jolt of recognition he hadn't experienced before. Up close, Riddle's composure and intensity were unsettling. The rumors he'd heard about a dark power lurking behind that polite mask suddenly felt all too real. Riddle greeted Harry with a level of personal assurance that left him questioning everything. Snape's name surfaced unexpectedly as Riddle spoke of the Potion Master's role in Voldemort's downfall, though in what capacity remained maddeningly vague. Then came the most cryptic assertion of all, that time itself stretched farther into the future than anyone realized, time that could change fates yet to be written. Harry's mind spun. Snape, Voldemort's demise, the promise of more time. What did it all mean? He stared back at Riddle, speechless, as whispers fluttered around him. Classmates edged closer, eager to watch their hero exchange words with this mysterious newcomer, but Harry was lost in his own head and paid them no heed. It wasn't until he trudged back into the Gryffindor dormitory that Harry finally snapped out of his daze. Ron sat perched on the edge of his four-poster bed, eyes wide with concern. "Harry, what did you two talk about? What did you confirm?" he asked again, more urgently this time. Ron wasn't angry, far from it. As Harry's oldest friend and the self-proclaimed strategist of their trio, he prided himself on keeping track of every detail in Harry's life. Now he needed answers, and Harry knew he had to find the right words before the truth slipped away entirely. Harry had always believed his secret power, one said to slay even gods and Buddhas, would be the ultimate weapon against Voldemort. He'd unleashed it on the 4th floor last year, and again when he destroyed the lock at Horcrux last summer. Yet now, facing Voldemort's familiar gaze, he sensed nothing. His power lay utterly silent. A hushed voice broke the stillness. "Harry," Ron whispered, eyes wide, "your magic didn't react. It just stayed quiet." Every other student in the Gryffindor dormitory was snoring away, everyone but Ryan, who'd vanished without a trace. Harry bolted upright. "How do you know?" he demanded. Ron's grin was almost conspiratorial. "I just noticed." He looked far too pleased with himself. Harry's mind raced. Was Ron playing him all along, pretending to be the dumb one before springing his trap? He thought of Seamus's old joke about feigning sleep to catch a foe unawares. Had Malfoy's theory been right? Was Harry the unsuspecting tiger being stalked by Ron's disguised cunning? Under the blankets, Ron lay still, head just peeking out. He seemed innocent enough, blissfully unaware of the doubt glinting in Harry's eyes. Inside, however, Ron was bursting with triumph. Of course it was him, the trio's strategist, their very own military advisor. He couldn't wait to tell Draco tomorrow. Ron twisted restlessly on the bed, wriggling like a caterpillar under the covers. His wild reaction banished the last of Harry's doubts. No way could this bumbling idiot be anything more than lucky. Idiots live off pure chance, otherwise they'd never make it this far. Harry shook his head, suppressing a wry complaint as he eyed the gleaming gold devil's passport card clenched in Ron's hand. When the excitement finally ebbed, Ron blinked and sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Harry, how does that power interact with Riddle?" he asked, voice hushed and incredulo. There was something almost fraternal in his tone, as though he were speaking to a brother he'd never met. Harry was about to answer when a soft snore drifted through the room. Ron had already drifted off, curled up on the mattress. A fond smile tugged at Harry's lips. The scene brought back a vivid memory of sharing Draco's tent at the Black family estate. Two friends huddled together in the dark, secrets whispered by lamplight. And in that moment, everything clicked into place again. Chapter 79. The House of Wishes. On the 8th floor of Hogwarts, directly opposite the worm-eaten tapestry, showing Barnabas the Barmy's ill-fated attempt to teach a troll ballet, an effort that ended with him soundly beaten, a lone figure materialized out of thin air. His emergence was so seamless, it was as if he'd always stood there, unnoticed by anyone. Strangely, though the tapestry loomed before him, neither the decaying troll nor the unfortunate Barnabas registered in his sight. To him, they simply didn't exist, as though he were a phantom passing through the castle walls. A round, shadowy shape slipped from the folds of his black robe trimmed with gold, a plump black cat. It meowed softly and padded back and forth in front of a blank stretch of stone. After completing 3 deliberate circuits, a door abruptly appeared where there had been only wall. Well done. The room of requirement clearly knows its feline clientele. The newcomer, Ryan, held out his left hand. The cat leapt into his palm, purring as it settled. Ryan's right hand closed around the gleaming brass handle. He swung the door open and stepped into a vast chamber that soared above him like a grand cathedral. Ryan had long suspected that the room of requirement was large, but nothing prepared him for the sight before him. It felt less like a single chamber and more like a walled city, crammed with centuries' worth of hidden treasures. Stacks of forgotten furniture, dusty crates, and mysterious trunks were piled high as far as the eye could see, forming narrow alleys and passageways between them. Broken chairs and tables, likely the victims of accidental magic, lay side by side with carefully wrapped packages that, according to house elves' meticulous notes, preserved the castle's dignity by hiding any trace of mischief. Against the far wall, thousands of dusty tomes towered in teetering piles. Banned volumes, half-finished scrolls, and stolen manuscripts, each one scrawled with arcane notes or hastily corrected in the margins, waited silently for discovery. Ryan's heart sank with regret. Had he found this place sooner, he might never have needed to write that cumbersome book or set up his own potion workshop. Here, in this hidden vault, lay everything a wizard could ever dream of, proof that generations of Hogwarts folk had used the Room of Requirement not just for shelter, but as a secret repository for their most precious, and sometimes most illicit, possessions. A short distance away loomed a heap of forbidden artifacts, most of them still serviceable. A few battered winged slingshots and charred wolf-tooth flying saucers hovered feebly above the pile, their broken frames twitching like injured birds. To Harry, in the original timeline, they'd have been worthless junk, indistinguishable from a mountain of splintered furniture. But to Ryan, the alchemist, every fragment held potential. He could refurbish those slingshots, strip down the flying saucers for rare metals, even extract lingering enchantments from their jagged edges. And that was just the cast-offs. Nestled deeper in the tangle were unmistakable treasures. Eggshells from dragons long extinct, crystalline jewelry humming with latent magic, and bizarre hat adornments infused with arcane wards. Shimmering weapons made of unknown alloys glinted in the gloom, while dusty vials of forbidden potions still pulsed with a faint, sinister glow after centuries. In a corner lay the crumpled remnants of half-finished, or perhaps fully completed forbidden experiments, their secrets waiting to be unraveled. Ryan ground his teeth. Damn crab! In the original world line, Crab's fiendfire had reduced all this to ash. What a waste. Resources that could have fueled 100 breakthroughs, knowledge erased in an instant. Here, though, it all remained, ripe for rediscovery, and Ryan intended to claim every last piece. Ryan stood amid the smoldering wreckage of the Room of Requirement, mentally retracing the moment it finally collapsed. He remembered how the last handful of objects, untouched by flame, had been hurled aloft by the fire fiends in a grotesque celebration. Gleaming cups, dented shields, a strand of glittering necklaces, and an old, tarnished crown. Even as the inferno consumed them, Ryan knew these were priceless artifacts, each in its own right as significant as one of Voldemort's Horcruxes. But before he could hunt down those scattered treasures, there was one Horcrux he had to recover first, Ravenclaw's diadem, the faded crown he'd seen vanish years ago. Voldemort had hidden it in that very chamber during his brief return to Hogwarts as defense against the dark arts professor. In his arrogance and haste, the Dark Lord never suspected that the diadem remained within the castle's walls, waiting to be found. For Ryan, discovering the diadem should have been effortless. He could have extended his awareness to sweep through every corridor and hidden nook of Hogwarts, or unleashed Jerry, his specially trained Horcrux-scenting familiar, to sniff out its lingering magic. But that approach struck him as too pedestrian. Instead, Ryan chose to follow a more intriguing lead. He recalled the clue Harry had used to conceal the Half-Blood Prince's potions book, convinced the same riddle would guide him here. His memory pointed to an alley just opposite the castle's main entrance, a passage long overlooked by both students and professors. Clutching his wand, Ryan set off toward that forgotten passageway. If his instincts were correct, he would unearth Ravenclaw's diadem and take one more step toward undoing Voldemort's darkest legacy. Ryan slipped through the narrow entrance and immediately turned right, where a hulking troll specimen loomed against the wall, its mottled green skin stretched tight over rippling muscle. This was the landmark he needed. Pushing past the troll, he walked straight into an alcove where a battered, vanishing cabinet stood precariously on a low pedestal. Its dark wood was cracked, the door hanging off one hinge. He passed it and turned left, his footsteps echoing on the stone floor, until he reached a massive cabinet pockmarked with bubbling corrosion, as though someone had doused it in powerful acid. "This must be it," he murmured. Ryan grasped the warped handle and eased the door open. It creaked so loudly he half expected someone to come running, only to reveal a hidden cage inside. A foul stench hit him as he peered in. A grotesque, five-legged creature lay dead amid rusted bars. Its limbs splayed at impossible angles. Starved to nothing, it was a pitiful sight. "If you can't afford a pet, don't keep one," he thought, shaking his head. Next to the cage sat a battered wooden crate. He lifted its lid and found a cracked bust of an ugly old wizard, nose chipped, mug twisted in a permanent sneer. Beside it lay a gray, wispy wig and, glinting in the dim light, a tarnished crown. Ryan blinked. That was all? He'd half expected some elaborate trap or a magical riddle. He ran a finger along the crown's rim, disappointed at how straightforward the reward had been. In his last life's fanfictions, the heroes, armed with photographic memories, still never located this crown, even though its hiding place was spelled out right here. Too easy, he muttered, slipping it into his cloak pocket. Quietly, he closed the cabinet door and retraced his steps, the echo of his boots swallowed by the empty corridor. Ryan reached out and tried to lift the crown, but it wouldn't budge. Even when he slipped out of the room and returned moments later, everything lay exactly as he'd left it. The hiding place never shifted. Over time, he'd realized the deeper an object sat, the more it sank into the chamber's recesses. "All right, Jerry, let's eat," Ryan said, rubbing his temples in mild boredom. He reminded himself that a Horcrux, this diadem or any other, only worked through direct contact, and even then its influence was sluggish. It had no overt power until someone touched it. Jerry, Ryan's natural enemy, slithered forward. The crown trembled just a few times as the creature's tongue flicked out and licked its surface. Instantly, the fragment of soul dispersed. The Ravenclaw diadem gleamed pure and white again, like jade in sunlight. With the Horcrux neutralized, the diadem felt noticeably heavier in Jerry's grip. Ryan let the other trinkets, a goblet, a shield, and a luminous necklace, slip from his fingers. "Jack," Ryan called, waving his hand. A gray mist swirled before him and resolved into the house elf Jack, who bowed respectfully. "Take these back to the castle," Ryan ordered, nodding toward the recovered artifacts. Jack picked them up carefully. Mission accomplished. Chapter 80, Spring Feelings. At midnight in the House of All Wishes, Jack the house elf stood before Ryan, bowing deeply. In Ryan's hand gleamed an artifact as precious as Ravenclaw's lost diadem. With a trembling hand, Jack accepted it. Moments later, Jack slipped back through the dimensional wall and reappeared beside Ryan. Without a word, Ryan drew his wand, and a sheet of parchment materialized in Jack's outstretched hand. The page bore a hastily drawn map. "This portal will stay open for one night only," Ryan explained. "I sketched this map just now. Anything circled in red must be brought back to the castle." He tapped the tip of his wand against the air, and a ribbon of molten silver light spiraled into existence. It coalesced, shimmering like moonlight, until it took the shape of a delicate glove. The glove floated down and settled over Jack's slender hand as if it belonged there. "One more warning," Ryan said, his voice growing serious. "Anything I've marked with a skull, even though it's also red, is deadly. Do not touch those items with anything but your bare hands. Once you retrieve them, bring them straight to my study, and don't handle them again." Before Jack could reply, Ryan vanished, leaving only the faint echo of his last words and the soft glow of the enchanted glove on Jack's hand. Ryan didn't really worry about Jack's safety. Beyond that dimensional barrier, the Lord God held everything in hand. He'd see to it. The enchanted glove, after all, had only been a hastily conceived backup plan. What truly captured Ryan's interest now was the crown. He slipped through the veil into the Ravenclaw common room and materialized silently beside the house's eagle statue. Even at this late hour, when the corridors lay deserted, the Grey Lady stood just as Nick had described, her silver form hovering before Helga Ravenclaw's likeness. Oddly enough, Ryan's presence went unnoticed. his practiced stillness rendering him invisible. Frankly, with his abilities, he could have toyed with far darker impulses. If he'd chosen, Hogwarts' most beautiful witches might now be nursing surprise pregnancies. But he wasn't that sort of person. He lingered in the shadows, observing the ghostly figure. The Grey Lady, once Helena Ravenclaw, glowed softly in the moonlight, her translucent robes stirring without a breeze. She stared up at the statue of her mother, expression vacant. And yet her eyes, even as a specter, they brimmed with a sorrow so profound it wrenched at the heart. Ryan found himself unconsciously mouthing the 16-character mantra that summoned his inner sage. As the final syllable left his lips, he felt the familiar surge of clairvoyance. Within his mind's hidden recesses, he slipped into sage mode, heightened, alert, every sense sharpened. Then, back in the real world, he shifted his focus to the prize that had drawn him here. The crown, set at the statue's feet. A faint aura shimmered around it, promising untold power. Ryan straightened his shoulders. This was the moment. He would claim the crown, and with it, perhaps, the fate of worlds that lay on either side of that thin dimensional wall. The idea that Ravenclaw's crest could bring wisdom is more fascinating in theory than in practice. It doesn't actually make you smarter, nor is it a magical repository of knowledge, as some wizards have speculated, and it certainly won't turn you into a more powerful sorcerer. Ryan finally understood why Helena Ravenclaw, Miss Grey, had been so desperate to keep it. She'd stolen her mother's treasure, hoping the diadem would grant her brilliance, only to realize it did nothing beyond leaving her feeling foolish, an empty shell. Helena had always believed she would succeed her mother, but when the crown failed to meet her lofty expectations, it shattered her confidence. Ravenclaw herself had been hesitant to entrust it to her daughter, fearing that Helena's dreams would collapse under the weight of reality. In truth, the diadem's power was surprisingly simple. It served as a kind of mental lullaby, calming an overactive mind and banishing the distractions that cloud clear thought. To Ryan, it was no more effective than tucking his pet hamster, Dr. Flywheel, into his pocket, a warm, comforting presence, but nothing more. The crest had proven useless to Helena, leaving no legacy of genius, just a hollow reminder of what she was not. Yet it felt too precious to destroy, too shameful to wear. Ryan glanced across the room at Ms. Grey, pondering whether her refusal to part with the crown was born of love, regret, or something far deeper. Grey's fragile expression sparked another idea in Ryan's mind, but he knew better than to act on it right away. He resolved to wait until tomorrow. Loading Harry with any more tasks today would be unfair. The next morning at 7 o'clock, sunlight filtered through Harry's curtains, warm and bright against his eyelids. A soft breeze, playful as a lover's caress, lifted a few strands of his hair and carried the crisp scent of grass and trees from the grounds beyond Hogwarts. Harry sat up and swung the curtains aside. Below, along the shore of the Black Lake, the grass glowed emerald in the dawnlight. Above the water, a solitary figure hovered on a broomstick, looping in graceful circles. The dormitory remained silent. His housemates were still fast asleep. Bolstered by their slumbering presence, Harry slipped from his bed, careful not to wake anyone, and rummaged through his bag for the telescope Draco's father had given him. It was a panoramic model, a Christmas gift from a devoted fan, designed for Quidditch matches. It could replay key moments, slow the action to a crawl, or even flash up instant tactical analyses. With a final glance around the room to confirm he was still alone, Harry raised the telescope to his eye and trained it on the lone rider. Through the lens, he saw a striking girl, her long black hair glinting like polished obsidian in the morning sun. She arced and dove above the lake, every movement precise and mesmerizing. Harry settled into his seat high in the stands, peering through his panoramic telescope as the Ravenclaw seeker came into view. Her long lashes fluttered like silken fans, and her dark eyes shone with fierce determination as she guided her Comet 260 broom through a series of elegant loops and dives. Great, she's a Ravenclaw, and she's riding a Comet 260. Harry's heart skipped. If only he could swoop down on his own Nimbus 2001 and introduce himself. He imagined catching her attention. Mind if I join in? Surely she'd be thrilled to ride alongside the boy who lived. He smothered an impulsive grin. Of course, she wasn't about to be dazzled by a broomstick, or by him. After all, Hagrid had said every witch and wizard in Britain knew Harry Potter's name by heart. Still, the thought that she might care more about his famous status than her own skill made his stomach twist. No, she can't be starstruck, he told himself. She seems too talented, too focused for that, and she wouldn't be up here just to get close to Harry Potter. She's a Ravenclaw, proud and independent. He trained his lens on her again, replaying her every daring maneuver in slow motion. Then, what was that? A small silver badge on her robe, the Tornadoes team crest, Ravenclaw blue and bronze, and that glossy black hair. Could she be Chu Zhang? The elusive seeker Captain Johnny had raved about, but who'd never appeared at a match in front of Harry before? Harry's pulse quickened. Whatever her name, whatever her story, this mysterious Ravenclaw had just become the most intriguing player on the pitch. Harry watched as Hermione greeted Cho Chang with a bright smile. Apparently, they were friends. Harry's heart sank a little at the thought, but he couldn't stop thinking about Cho. How could he ever approach her without making a fool of himself? Then, almost as if Hermione had planted the idea, his mind drifted to the legendary diadem of Ravenclaw. Hermione had told him that Hagrid once retrieved the diadem from Vault 713. It was said to be a lost treasure of Rowena Ravenclaw, imbued with the power to enhance a wizard's wisdom. If Harry could find and wear it, surely Cho, a proud Ravenclaw, would look at him differently. He might even have the confidence to speak to her without blushing. Just then, a memory surfaced. Nearly Headless Nick had confided in Harry that the Grey Lady had been lingering beside the marble statue of Rowena Ravenclaw in the common room, gazing at it with uncanny intensity. Harry also recalled reading an essay that identified the Grey Lady as Rowena's daughter. Could the diadem be hidden within that statue, appearing only at certain times? At all other moments, it was nothing more than cold stone. If the ghost's strange fascination was any clue, the diadem might be manifesting again right now. Harry's pulse quickened. If he could solve this mystery, locate the diadem of Ravenclaw, he just might win Cho's admiration and finally find the courage to ask her to tea. Chapter 81, Close Heart's Adolescence, a beautiful, misty word for the tumult of being a teenager. Even a young wizard like Harry wasn't exempt from the ordinary vulnerabilities of human youth. With spring stirring in the air, Ryan had slipped a single word, crown, into Harry's thoughts. He meant no harm. He only wanted to spark a memory, and it worked beyond his expectations. Harry, swept up in the stirrings of first crushes and daydreams, pictured the tall, white marble statue tucked into the alcove of the Gryffindor common room, and most of all, the stone circlet resting atop its head. Ryan had planned only to wake that curiosity. Everything else would follow naturally. But Harry didn't wait for guidance. He leapt ahead on his own. Tucked away under the quilt of a four-poster bed beside the wall, Ryan watched in growing bewilderment. He couldn't fathom how Harry had leapt from ogling Cho Chang to scheming a mission after the Ravenclaw diadem. All Ryan could conclude was this: Harry Potter had entered puberty, and his boyish logic had gone galloping off in Ron Weasley's direction. It wasn't like the Harry Ryan knew, and, truth be told, even Ron's usually boundless imagination seemed dull tonight. Maybe he was just a bit hungry. Either way, it was clear, Harry's heart was on the move, and the chase was just beginning. Meanwhile, Harry was already dressed and waiting by the statue. His confidence came from a secret technique known only to himself, Ryan, and Hermione, an ancient Atlantean method he'd discovered over the summer. Originally intended to enhance potions, it also gave him a rudimentary ability to sense magical artifacts, much like the heightened sixth sense some of the most powerful wizards possess. If his hunch was right, that technique would guide him straight to the long-lost Ravenclaw diadem once it reappeared. At exactly 7:30 a.m., Harry slipped into the alcove beside the Ravenclaw common room dormitory entrance. A small group of first years, proud of their early rising reputation, blinked and whispered as he passed. He was used to drawing stares and paid them no mind. He hardly noticed the courteous nod of the Ravenclaw prefect. His only thought was the statue and the secret it still held. Harry almost walked right through Ms. Grey as she drifted silently beside him. He recoiled, his neck tensing in reflex, memories of accidentally passing through nearly Headless Nick still fresh, like a splash of ice water down his spine. I'm sorry, he stammered, stumbling back. I didn't see you there. But Miss Grey didn't so much as blink at his apology. She remained as still and unattainable as a lone plum blossom in winter's frost. Harry followed her unblinking gaze to Ravenclaw's table, where the house's namesake sat with that same cool, statuesque beauty, hands folded, expression unreadable. Perhaps it was the pressure of the Quidditch captain hovering nearby, or his own desperate hunt for Ravenclaw's diadem, but Harry found the words tumbling out before he could stop them. Is she your mother? At last, Miss Grey turned her frosty eyes on him. A mocking sneer curved her lips. Another student after Ravenclaw's crown? She said, her voice low and disdainful. Do you really think it belongs to you now? The arrogance in her tone was absolute, as if she alone held the right to covet that ancient treasure. Chapter 7. A Name Unveiled. Harry edged forward in the hushed corridor outside the library, flanked by a dozen wide-eyed first-years. At the far end stood Professor Grey, her silver hair pinned back, arms folded, her expression as inscrutable as ever. Rumor had it she was the daughter of Rowena Ravenclaw herself. Harry needed to know the truth. So, he began, voice loud enough for the others to hear, you're really Ravenclaw's daughter? Hermione Ravenclaw, isn't it? A faint, sardonic smile curved the professor's lips, eerily reminiscent of the marble effigy of Rowena Ravenclaw in the tower. Before she could reply, though, she sneezed, shattering the silence. See? Harry whispered triumphantly to the first T-years. Told you so. The teasing smile dropped instantly, her cheeks losing whatever color they'd possessed. Translucent and cold, her eyes fixed on Harry with a sudden, piercing chill. How dare you? She murmured, voice trembling with anger. Even at a whisper, her words carried the weight of long-buried hurt. She hadn't lost her composure like that in decades, not since she'd first met that handsome boy over 40 years ago, the one who stole both her secret and her heart, then vanished without so much as a farewell. Now, it seemed, history threatened to repeat itself. You're a fool, she hissed, stepping around Harry and brushing past the stunned first-years. Get out of my sight. Robes swirling, Professor Grey glided away into the shadows. The group stood frozen until Harry shook himself, cheeks burning. He had intended only a playful tease, but he'd stumbled into something far more serious, an old wound waiting to be reopened, and somehow he sensed this was only the beginning. Harry Potter paused at the threshold of the Ravenclaw common room, utterly unaware that someone had been standing just behind him. A faint mist of tears gathered in the corners of her silvery eyes, and for a moment she simply hovered there, motionless. I'm sorry, she murmured, her voice as soft as drifting smoke. You startled me. May I know your name? Harry flushed. Of course, I'm Harry Potter. She studied him for a heartbeat, and the faintest, almost wistful smile curved her lips. He sensed she was recalling a day long ago, when a young Tom Riddle, bearing Harry's face, had tried his smoothest lines on her, only to be met with a cold refusal. You're not angry anymore? Harry ventured, his voice a nervous whisper. Her laughter, when it came, was like sunshine breaking through clouds. The warmth of it stirred something in Harry's chest, making his heart beat unevenly. He'd never noticed her like this before, pale, graceful, hauntingly beautiful. In that instant, Cho Chang's face, which had been dancing at the edge of his thoughts, blurred and vanished. Around him, Ravenclaw students drifted past, but Harry scarcely registered them. All he could see was the woman before him. Could the Grey Lady, Helena Ravenclaw herself, be the greatest treasure he'd ever hoped to find? Chapter 12. The whisper and the name Grey's voice drifted to Harry's ears like a soft melody as she leaned closer, her silver-gray cloak brushing against the flagstones. He stared back, caught in the pale light of her eyes. When he didn't look away, she offered him a gentle smile. So, she murmured, all you've wanted to know is my name, Harry Potter. Is that it? Nothing more? Her gaze flicked down at the Ravenclaw crest on his robes. And yet here I stand, and to you seem more captivating than any house emblem. Harry's cheeks flamed. He opened his mouth, then shut it, mind racing. Finally, he whispered, Can I call you Helena? His voice wavered with hope and shyness. Her smile deepened, a flicker of warmth lighting her features. Yes, she said simply. Helena. Harry felt a sudden rush of relief, as if a weight had lifted. He could almost breathe again. Helena watched him for a moment, her expression softening with sympathy. She recognized in his wide, uncertain eyes the same nervous boy she once had been when faced with the name Tom Riddle. The air grew still. Harry found himself utterly lost in Helena's presence, forgetting the statue's silent majesty behind them. Then, like the crack of a hidden eggshell, a sharp sound shattered the hush. Both of them turned, hearts pounding, toward the looming stone figure. There, a hairline fracture appeared, tracing across the marble surface. And from within, something ancient, something waiting, began to awaken. Chapter 82. The crown appears suddenly. Crack! Crack! The sharp sound snapped Harry and Helena out of their shared reverie. Around them, students in the lounge turned to see what had happened. Atop the marble Ravenclaw statue, a finely carved crown of stone, a network of hairline fractures was spreading. The ivory surface cracked like fragile eggshell, flaking away layer by layer beneath a beam of light as pale and bright as moonlight. With each split, the marble peeled back to reveal a gleaming core of white jade, crystal clear and radiant. Harry stared, wide-eyed, at the heart of that glow. The light formed a Y-shaped pattern, its two arms extending outward from his and Helena's chests. There was no warmth, no physical sensation, just these ethereal strands of light that seemed to flow directly from their hearts. He recalled how, in his battles against Voldemort, he'd felt a raw power surge through him, vivid and undeniable. But this was different, otherworldly, as if it existed on a plane beyond his understanding. Did his conversation with Helena somehow trigger a mechanism left behind by Rowena Ravenclaw herself? Harry had no way of knowing for sure. All he could do was watch, astonished, and wonder if this mysterious illumination was linked to Helena's name, to the moment they'd just shared, and perhaps even to the long-lost smile hidden deep within her heart. Harry felt the glow around him intensify, and he realized it must be tied to that mysterious smile. Outside, no more than a dozen seconds had passed, but something extraordinary was unfolding before him. From the top of Rowena Ravenclaw's spectral crown, a brilliant diadem rose into the air, riding a shaft of light that alternated between swift arcs and languid glides as it drifted toward Harry and Helena. "That can't be," Harry whispered, wide-eyed. "I stole it. I hid it in a hollow tree in Albania. How could it end up here?" Helena's lips trembled. She stared at her mother's ghost, incredulous. No, she thought. Rowena Ravenclaw must have known all along exactly where it was. She turned to Harry. "He knew," she murmured. "He brought it back." Long ago, Helena had hungered to eclipse her renowned mother. Convinced her own intellect surpassed Rowena's, she stole the diadem and fled Hogwarts, determined to claim the glory for herself. Devastated by the betrayal, Rowena never admitted the diadem was lost. She concealed both the theft and her daughter's treachery from the other founders. On her deathbed, Rowena's only wish was to see Helena one last time. But Helena's pride wouldn't let her return, even though she knew her mother lay dying. She chose her ambition over the bond between them. In the end, legend says, Helena's life was cut short by a crazed suitor, her story ending in violence. And now, after centuries, the stolen diadem had come home, hovering before them, its radiant light a testament to a mother's enduring love and a daughter's tragic fall. Chapter 7. The Ghost of Ravenclaw Tower. After she died, everything finally became clear. What she truly wanted wasn't power, fame, or even revenge, but something far simpler, a place to belong. So she returned to Hogwarts as a ghost, drifting back to the familiar stone corridors and soaring turrets of Ravenclaw Tower. There, amid the shifting moonlight and silent hours, she tended her mother's old rooms, a vigil she was content to keep for eternity. Her mother had long since gone, and in the empty cloisters, a single suitor had followed her into death, choosing ghostly existence over a life without her. Yet she had closed her heart to him, and to everyone else, dedicating herself entirely to the safety of her mother's legacy, in particular the legendary Ravenclaw diadem, lost for centuries, whose whereabouts she alone knew. Over the millennia, ambitious seekers heard rumors of the silent spirit guarding the diadem. Countless adventurers crept into the tower, lured by tales of untold wisdom, only to vanish or retreat, unable to draw a single word from her lips. And so her vigil continued, beyond time and hope, until the night a boy arrived who was unlike any who had come before. He was young, handsome in a sharp, intriguing way, and though his emerald eyes held a glint of ambition, there was something vulnerable about him too. He introduced himself as Tom Riddle, and while his name carried a weight, Slytherin's blood ran through his veins, he bore the burden with unusual grace. More than anything, he longed to be judged on his own merits, not his ancestry. Her resolve melted in his presence. For the first time in centuries, she spoke, guiding him through hidden passages to a secret chamber where beneath a dusty portrait the diadem lay concealed. When he lifted it, the crown's beauty cast flickering light across his face, and in that moment she believed she had found a kindred spirit. But before the dawn of her next graduation from student to fully fledged ghost, Tom Riddle vanished. No warning, no farewell, only an echo of footsteps fading down the marble staircase. She waited in vain for him to return, but he did not. At last she realized the cruel truth. She had been deceived. Years passed, though for her they were but moments, and then, one still night, his form reappeared in the tower's upper gallery. Time had left no mark on him. He might have stepped from the past. Yet when he saw her, his expression was unreadable. Still, he would not come closer. She floated between hope and despair, glancing at the spot where once she had trusted him with her deepest secret. Tom Riddle lingered in the moonlight, as silent and unapproachable as the diadem itself, and in that fragile quiet, she understood that some wounds, even in death, do not easily heal. She leaned against the cool marble of her mother's statue, guilt and resentment coiling in her chest like vipers. She had been lost in those dark thoughts when a boy appeared, an inexperienced youth who'd already earned fame by defeating Voldemort in his first year. Yet to her, Harry Potter was no more distinguished than any other Hogwarts student. What gave her pause, though, was the polite tilt of his head and the precise cadence of his greeting. It echoed too closely the way Tom Riddle had once addressed her. Back then, he'd been the single beam of warmth in her endless winter. Now the roles were reversed. Harry Potter stood in the very place she herself had occupied so long ago, and in her mind she'd become Riddle. It wasn't mere fancy. She watched him closely, how he persuaded Peeves to drift off without a tantrum, how he carried himself with unassuming kindness. This boy was nothing like Riddle, humble where Riddle was proud, gentle where Riddle was calculating. She'd expected nothing more than a cordial exchange with a bright but distant underclassman, someone she might even have mentored. And yet, no conversation could have prepared her for what happened next. As Harry spoke, her eyes drifted to the statue's head, and there it was again, her mother's crown. Gleaming gold, set just so upon the marble locks, it was the same diadem she had beheld for 1,000 years. In that instant, centuries of silence and sorrow tumbled back into her heart, and she knew this encounter would change everything. Helena hesitated for a moment, her eyes on the crown Tommy had just handed her. At first, she'd been convinced it was another one of Riddle's tricks, an elaborate surprise designed to draw her in. But something else pulsed in the metal, warm and unmistakable. Her mother's magic. It couldn't be faked. "I still don't understand," Helena whispered. "Who is this him you've been talking about?" Harry studied the crown as if seeing it for the first time. Its filigree caught the torchlight, weaving patterns that seemed to shift beneath his fingers. "There is no him," he said gently. "This belongs to you. Your mother left it behind, waiting for your smile. I mean the real, unguarded one, when your heart can finally rest." Helena's throat tightened. Harry's voice carried a curious resonance, faint yet clear, as if threaded through generations. He thought of his own mother, whose last act had been one of love so powerful it had woven a protective enchantment around him. That same love still flowed in his veins, a legacy that had helped him stand against Voldemort himself. When Harry touched the crown, he'd felt it too, the echo of a mother's devotion, enveloping her child. It had nothing to do with any distant promise or vague prophecy. Helena's mother must have discovered the crown long ago, hidden it within her statue until the day her daughter was ready to claim it. Helena's composure broke. Tears shimmered in her eyes as she lowered her head. I suppose you're right," she choked out. "After all these years, I still couldn't trust you. Is my smile really that important?" Harry stepped closer and offered his hand. "More than you know, your happiness, your peace, is the greatest magic of all." For a moment they stood together in silence, the crown resting between them like a promise reborn. Helena stared at the marble statue, its smooth surface somehow reflecting her mother's features, the mother who had worried over her so tenderly during that final illness. A shiver ran through her. Could her mother's death have been tied to this very crown? Helena felt her cheeks burn. How stupid she'd been. Ravenclaw's diadem was only an artifact, a symbol, not the source of Ravenclaw's brilliance. The founder's greatness never depended on a piece of jewelry. Then a startling idea struck her. What if her mother, after stealing the original diadem, had crafted a new crown and hidden it inside this statue on her deathbed, waiting for Helena to find it? All this time she'd been blind to her mother's final gift. She glanced at Harry. He stepped forward, his voice gentle. "It's yours, Helena. Do with it as you will." Helena turned back to the pedestal. Nestled in its velvet-lined recess lay a delicate metal circlet, the handiwork of her mother's last loving act. With trembling fingers, her ghostly hand reached out. The moment her pale fingertips touched the crown's edge, a miracle unfolded. From within the visible diadem, a second crown shimmered into being, an invisible, pearly-white halo that hovered just above its metal sibling. In the next heartbeat, Helena's spectral form lifted the combined diadem and placed it upon her head. As the twin crowns settled into place, a soft radiance bathed the chamber. The diadems fit her perfectly, as if crafted to meet her every need. And in that light, Helena, ghost though she was, appeared more alive, more herself than she ever had before. Chapter 84, in the auditorium. "Harry, can we try on that crown?" someone called. "What does it feel like?" another voice piped up. "You'd rent it to me, right? 10 galleons an hour. How on earth did you remove it?" "I'm a student. Why can't you just hand it over?" "No way. Even if you're a genius, you can't do that. Where did that monster come from? Are you really a Ravenclaw?" The cacophony of questions echoed off the marble walls until the Ravenclaws realized they'd been too pushy. Sheepish, they formed a circle around Harry, trading their earlier impatience for polite curiosity as they studied him and the gleaming circlet in his hands. Harry cleared his throat and offered a reluctant smile. This crown originally belonged to the great Rowena Ravenclaw and was passed down to her daughter, Miss Grey. I convinced her to undo the knot at the statue's base, which activated a hidden mechanism and released the crown. He sighed, glancing at his watch. "Also, we've got classes in the morning." At that moment, Anthony, Hermione, and the rest of their group emerged from the corridor. The second-year Ravenclaws, Harry's own classmates, had a habit of traveling together after lessons to avoid Peeves and his pranks. Under Ron's quietly authoritative lead, they wove through the curious onlookers and headed toward the Great Hall. The enchanted ceiling above the Great Hall was a uniform slate gray this morning, mimicking the overcast sky outside and reflecting Harry's mood perfectly. He sat at the long Gryffindor table, surrounded by steaming bowls of porridge, plates of pickled herring, stacks of bread, and generous helpings of eggs and bacon. For reasons he couldn't quite explain, his thoughts drifted to Chu Jang, how tirelessly she always worked, even on gloomy days like this. He reminded himself that when he'd first woken up, the sky had still been clear. Before he could dwell on it further, Draco Malfoy came striding over from the Slytherin table, Pansy Parkinson, Crabbe, and Goyle close behind, all wearing the same eager, curious expressions. "Harry," Draco called out, forcing a grin, "I hear you really got the Ravenclaw diadem." Harry blinked in surprise. Whispers and sideways glances from students at every table turned into outright stares. Even the professors, busy handing out class schedules, seemed unable to resist sneaking peeks in his direction. If it weren't for the distraction of the timetables, along with the presence of witches and wizards from all 4 Hogwarts houses, he had a sinking feeling things might get even worse. Beside him, Ron leaned forward, eyebrows raised, while Ginny sat a little further down the table, craning her neck to see what was happening. Harry took a deep breath, bracing himself for the questions he knew were coming. Harry stared helplessly at the battered copy of Magic in the Muggle world resting on a milk jug. Even that couldn't lift his spirits. Yet, oddly enough, he was happy. The book's revelations thrilled him. He'd long suspected Voldemort's legendary Horcrux set was dangerously unstable, and that Ron's father, Arthur Weasley, held the promise of Wizardkind's future. But no author had ever laid out those truths so clearly. Eagerly, he lost himself in the next chapter. Across from him, The Ravenclaw diadem sat upon a velvet cushion, its silver frame inset with a single sapphire. It seemed to pulse with a gentle magic, soothing even when he wasn't wearing it. Draco Malfoy's voice broke Harry's concentration. Is that the crown you said you wore?" he asked, eyes wide. This year had already brought Draco face to face with two of the Big Four's legendary relics. The first, a cursed locket, had been destroyed before he'd even had a chance to examine it. And now, here was another. He looked as if he might faint. Harry shrugged casually. "You'll have plenty of time to try it later. If you want, I'll lend it to you." Just then, Professor Flitwick bustled into the room, wand in hand. His eyes went straight to the diadem. "Harry, I simply can't believe it. The Ravenclaw diadem, right here in the lounge, just waiting for us." The little professor's excitement was palpable as he hurried forward, eager to inspect one of Hogwarts's most fabled artifacts. Professor Flitwick's squeaky voice cut through the breakfast chatter. "All right, Potter, here's your timetable," he said, pressing a parchment into Harry's hand. Before Harry could reply, the little professor vanished in a swirl of robes. Harry unrolled the paper. "Defense against the dark arts, first lesson. Brilliant," Ron punched the air. Draco Malfoy frowned. "What? This can't be the doing of that person." He glanced at Harry, his worry for him momentarily driving out any thought of the missing diadem. "Professor Riddle, you mean?" piped up Anthony Goldstein, who'd been silent until now. "Is he dangerous?" Hermione asked. Anthony shrugged. "Dangerous? Hardly. To Harry, anyway, because he's a true Ravenclaw." "A real Ravenclaw?" Harry spluttered, popping another egg into his mouth to calm his pounding heart. He had no idea anyone thought of him that way. "When did I become a Ravenclaw?" Harry demanded, glancing at Ron. Ron just shook his head in confusion. Anthony leaned forward earnestly. "You know how the sword of Gryffindor lies hidden inside the sorting hat, and only a true Gryffindor can draw it out? It's the same with the diadem in the Ravenclaw statue. Only a genuine Ravenclaw can claim it, and you, Harry, are one." Hermione rolled her eyes. "Honestly, Harry, I've already told you, this whole mess started because of Ms. Grey." Harry stared down at his timetable, mind spinning, a secret Ravenclaw heritage, a mysterious Professor Riddle, and the puzzle of the lost diadem. Suddenly, worrying about defense against the dark arts felt like the least of his troubles. Harry really didn't want any more attention. He was already famous enough. Another burst of glory might ruin any hope of a normal life at Hogwarts. "I know how modest you are, Harry," Anthony exclaimed, his eyes brimming with tears. He raised his voice so loudly that Michael, who'd been standing nearby, rehearsing a speech for Ginny, looked up in surprise. Terry followed suit. In an instant, everyone around them was staring at Harry again, eager to talk about what Anthony had just said. It was nearly 9 o'clock, and neither Harry nor his reputation was going anywhere. Morning classes were about to start, so there wasn't time for a long discussion. Gryffindor and Hufflepuff students had both signed up for second or third year courses. Gryffindors would be in herbology and transfiguration, while Hufflepuffs had charms and herbology. Slytherins and Ravenclaws, by contrast, each had only one first-period class, History of Magic, which gave some of them a bit of extra time to catch up on sleep. Of course, Slytherins tended not to be as endlessly inquisitive as their Ravenclaw peers, but at that moment, it hardly mattered. All eyes were still on Harry, and not a single professor was in sight. They all hurried off to their own classes. "This is all your fault. I'm starving." Ron snapped at Anthony as he gave Draco a quick wave and bolted down the corridor. Thanks to the delay, Ron and the others ended up arriving early for Defense Against the Dark Arts. Meanwhile, the girls, too curious and perhaps a little smitten with Tom Riddle, had already slipped ahead, chatting excitedly as they went. Only Hermione stayed behind, lingering in the hallway with Ryan as if they had all the time in the world to enjoy a leisurely breakfast. Harry watched them go, stomach still growling, and couldn't help but fume. He clenched his fists at his sides. Damn Anthony, he hadn't eaten enough either. Chapter 85, Happy and Aggrieved Ryan. The great hall had emptied out once Harry left, and Ryan leaned back in his chair, smiling as he sipped his glass of milk. Hermione glanced over at him, frowning. "What's so funny?" she asked, eyeing the polished golden plate that reflected her own puzzled expression. "Nothing on your face," Ryan replied airily. I was just wondering if Ron will come up with an even funnier nickname for Harry than the Three Musketeers." Hermione shrugged and bent her head to her breakfast, but she had no idea what was really amusing Ryan. Last night, he'd orchestrated everything that would happen today. Every odd notion Harry and Helena followed, every twist and turn in their plans, had been nudged into place by Ryan, all according to his design. Well, almost everything. He hadn't arranged Harry's sudden thoughts of Cho Chang, nor the boy's surprising change of heart afterward. Ryan chuckled to himself. Except for him, he mused, all the other men were hopelessly predictable. With Helena's genuine smile this morning, the final piece of his scheme fell into place, the Ravenclaw diadem. He'd hidden it inside the marble sculpture last night, and subtly reawakened the enchantments Rowena Ravenclaw had woven into it. Now, with that magic strengthening, the diadem would soon reveal itself exactly as he intended. Content with how perfectly his plan was unfolding, Ryan leaned back again, happy at its success, yet secretly eager to see his friends' astonished faces when they discovered what he'd done. Let Helena believe her mother was behind it all, I reminded myself. Truth be told, credit where it's due, Tom Marvolo Riddle, Lord Voldemort, made a stroke of strategic genius when he turned Ravenclaw's lost diadem into one of his Horcruxes. By definition, a Horcrux works by embedding a fragment of its creator's soul into an object. This magic not only keeps the host item intact, it actually restores it to peak condition. Had Voldemort chosen a living being instead, that person's vitality would remain frozen in time, ageless yet ever at risk of violent death. But with an inanimate Horcrux and a still-living soul fragment, the wizard cannot truly perish so long as both survive. Even more remarkable, the Horcrux's power sustains the object itself. After centuries of neglect, Ravenclaw's diadem should have been nothing more than a corroded trinket, but Voldemort's soul fragment breathed new life into its original enchantments. That revival is precisely how Ryan later sensed the faint, ancient magic still lingering in the diadem. Had Voldemort not cursed it into that dull, rusty state for concealment, it would gleam today just as brilliantly as it did when it first crowned Hogwarts' founders. After Jerry absorbed the fragment of Voldemort's soul, Ryan made another startling discovery, but the spectral crown he'd crafted held no real value for him. Instead, he tapped into Ravenclaw magic to forge it specifically for Helena's sake. In doing so, he planned two outcomes. Helena would no longer mourn her mother's unrealized potential in the magical world, and Harry Potter would be forced to relive the same hardships he faced as a first-year student. His triumphs dimmed, his confidence shaken. This wasn't about Harry joking or teasing Hermione and Luna. It was a calculated challenge, a grind, designed to remind the Chosen One that he couldn't afford to be eclipsed by a youthful Lord Voldemort. Every detail of this scheme, from the crown's ghostly glow to its unpredictable powers, came from Ryan's uncanny ability to tinker with the fabric of magic. Unlike any wizard before him, he treated spells and artifacts like code modules, iterating steadily until even a phantom object could be made real. He presented the finished crown to Helena, knowing she would wear it proudly to resurrect her mother's legacy. By simulating Helena's mind, Ryan had foreseen her reaction down to the smallest gesture. And when the time came for someone of true authority to inspect this remarkable heirloom, there was only one name that may tottered: Albus Dumbledore. Ryan watched, utterly transfixed. What Dumbledore was attempting here felt like a magic none of them had ever encountered. Could the ghosts, spirits now able to taste and digest food, actually reclaim their magical abilities? If so, might they even form bonds strong enough to reproduce? And with that spectral wand in hand, fueled by the unaging hearts of phantoms who'd lingered for millennia, what kind of power could be unleashed? The possibilities both thrilled and terrified him. In effect, these immortal ghosts would stand on the same footing as living wizards, and perhaps represent the next evolutionary step for magical beings. But if wizardkind could transcend death itself, wouldn't that draw the attention of the god of death? Rumor held that the so-called Death Will, bound within the Elder Wand, could assert its own deadly influence over any wielder, even Albus Dumbledore. Lane's last move, a seemingly idle gambit, had tossed a wild card into the game, one capable of luring death out of the afterlife and into their world. In Ryan's mind, death was the ultimate level 7 entity, unbeatable and inexorable. Standing face to face with such a force, his odds of survival barely tipped to 50-50, assuming his physical body and magical reserves counted for nothing against that ancient power. Yet there was a crucial unknown. Death had never crossed back into the realm of the living. What if the sudden proliferation of ghosts, alive with magic, forced its hand? Should death itself step through the veil to halt this new evolution of wizardkind, Ryan knew there would be no turning back. He drew in a steadying breath. The moment to act was now. Luna Archer cocked her head in the charms classroom and fixed Ryan with a cool stare. "That laugh of yours was practically sinister." Ryan only grinned, a playful spark in his eyes. "Sinister? No, I prefer to call it the smile of wisdom." From the back of the room, Lane snorted. "If anyone could see you now, they'd be gobsmacked. There are 3 Ryans wandering Hogwarts, one in the Great Hall, one here in charms, and one over in potions." It was all part of Aquaman's ultimate dream secret, a spell so clever it went far beyond simple time-turning. After all, anyone who glared at you with ill intent would doom you to misfortune. Outsmarting them, by contrast, was cause for celebration. Ryan glanced at Luna and felt a surge of gratitude for the Smith family's passivity enchantment. Thanks to that charm, he could stride through the castle and spend time with his friends openly, unburdened by the complications of being notoriously handsome. In his previous life, before he'd traveled back in time and shed the name Zhou Yi, this had been a curse. Truth be told, maybe that was why he'd never fallen in love before high school graduation. He'd been too distracted by admirers. Some even claimed he was more attractive than Yanzu, and had unintentionally broken Baigu's heart. Ryan had always assumed that once he reached college, women would finally appreciate his impeccable character. But fate had other plans. He was hurled back in time before he even set foot on campus, before he could begin the sweet romance he'd been dreaming of. And now here he was, wallowing in regret over a youth spent single in his previous life. "Actually, I'm not happy with you," Luna said abruptly, her tone so serious it made Ryan pause. "I'm unhappy." She glanced away, as if certain no one could ever understand how she felt. Ryan blinked. Saintly? Empathizing with people who had wronged her? He stared at her in disbelief. "Wait, are you saying I have bad intentions toward you?" he asked, voice incredulous. Luna tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and looked down. "Yes, I think you mean to trick me into bearing your child," she replied softly, but without hesitation. The words hit Ryan like a slap. "Me? A gentleman, honest, reliable, and the heir to the Fitzgerald legacy. How could I possibly have bad intentions?" he thought, indignation building in his chest. He raised his voice, trying to make his big, earnest eyes convince her. "My father himself warned me about people like that, people who only want a family name." He paused, flustered. "But I swear, Luna, that's not me." Luna studied him, her large eyes wide with surprise. For the first time, Ryan sensed a crack in her armor, perhaps a sliver of doubt. And in that silent moment, he dared to hope he might prove her wrong. "What did I tell you about having children?" Ryan muttered miserably, his shoulders slumping. He was firmly and deliberately child-free. Chapter 86, A Unique Lesson. Ryan felt as though his sincerity had been devoured by a ravenous dog. After all, he was immortal. How could he possibly have a child? And that trickster Xenophilius Lovegood had really gone too far this time, leading little Luna astray. Ryan had assumed Luna was a gentle white rabbit, but it turned out she had a decidedly darker side. Clearing his throat, he addressed her with mock solemnity. "Ahem, Luna. Brace yourself. It'll be 9 o'clock before you know it. You might as well make some new friends while you're at it. Well, I'm off." With that, he vanished. "Luna? Were you just here a moment ago? Why didn't I see you?" Ryan murmured to himself, blinking in confusion. In the charms classroom next door, Ginny Weasley gently took Luna's hand and introduced her to a girl she just met. Luna's pale eyes sparkled with curiosity as she greeted her new acquaintance. Meanwhile, Ryan and Hermione, having finished a quick breakfast in the Great Hall, made their way to their Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson. They climbed the winding stairs, exchanged a few quiet words, then stepped inside, only to have Ryan stop dead in his tracks. He looked around in astonishment. This was no ordinary classroom. Instead of rows of desks and a blackboard, The room was laid out like a small movie theater. Cushioned seats arranged in ascending tiers, a large screen at the front, and soft, dim lighting casting a warm glow over everything. Hermione, equally surprised, whispered, "I didn't expect this. Has Professor Bones turned evening lectures into film screenings now?" Ryan shook his head, a grin tugging at his lips. "I had no idea, but I'm suddenly quite glad I didn't sneak a peek beforehand." As the last student filed in and the lights dimmed further, Ryan and Hermione crept into seats near the back. Whatever lesson lay ahead, it was bound to be different from anything they'd ever experienced in Hogwarts' Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom. The moment they stepped inside, Harry realized the classroom had been transformed into a miniature movie theater. The entire floor was tiered like a projection hall, and the familiar blackboard was gone, replaced by a vast, gleaming screen. To the right of it stood a small podium, no doubt reserved for Tom Riddle's grand entrance. Along the rows where desks usually stood, plush, integrated massage chair sofas now faced the screen, all upholstered in dark green and silver. Serpentine motifs curled across the carpet and spiraled overhead on the ceiling, undeniably Slytherin, but unmistakably Muggle in concept. By the time the rest of the Ravenclaw students filtered in, Harry and the boys in his group had claimed the back row. The girls, Hermione included, slipped into the front seats, but surprisingly, the entire center section remained empty. Puzzled, Hermione watched Ryan tug her gently toward a spot in the middle right. "Are we really about to watch a movie?" she whispered. Movies, after all, didn't exist in Britain's wizarding world. Hogwarts had never shown one. Ryan just grinned, eyes bright with anticipation. Around them, the hush deepened as every pair of eyes fixed on the screen. A hush fell over the room, broken only by the faint hum of the projectors warming up. Then, precisely at 9 o'clock, the classroom lights dimmed, and still Tom Riddle had not appeared. Yet in that expectant darkness, every Ravenclaw knew something extraordinary was about to unfold. As the bell rang, Professor Riddle swept into the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom in a sharply tailored green-striped suit. He moved with quiet authority to the front of the room, collected his attendance parchment, and began calling names. "Potter Harry?" Harry looked up immediately. "Here." Riddle offered him a warm, almost brotherly smile. "We exchanged greetings yesterday, Mr. Potter. As your new professor, I'm curious, what did you study in this subject last year?" Harry hesitated briefly, then answered with steady confidence. "We covered the basics of handling dark creatures, how to protect yourself if you don't know a spell, how to treat injuries afterward, like a werewolf bite, and we mastered the spark spell, so any witch or wizard nearby can detect when you're in danger." Riddle's dark eyebrows lifted ever so slightly. "Is that all?" Harry swallowed. "Yes, Professor." At Harry's side, Ron stared in disbelief. He'd half expected Potter to quake before this man, whose very name carried ominous weight. Instead, Harry spoke as if Riddle were any other professor. A cold trickle of sweat ran down Ron's back at the thought that, at any second, Riddle might snap, unleashing Avada Kedavra or the Cruciatus Curse. Yet for now, the room remained calm, except for the rapid beating of Ron's heart. Chapter 7. The Red Spark Demonstration. "Is that all?" Professor Riddle's voice carried a note of disappointment as he addressed Harry. "I was under the impression Dumbledore had taught you better." Harry's heart pounded, but he held his ground. A moment later, Riddle's lips curved into a thin smile. "Still, I've heard remarkable things about your red spark charm. Dumbledore says you once produced an effect he'd never witnessed before. Care to show it now?" Harry rose and walked to the cleared space beside the podium. Every student in the great hall turned to watch. He, too, was eager to see how Riddle would react. After all, this incarnation of Tom Riddle was the first remnant of Voldemort's soul that hadn't instinctively recoiled from the extraordinary magic coursing through Harry's veins. Sirius had reassured him after his last birthday that Riddle posed no real danger, but Harry's doubts remained. This demonstration offered the perfect moment to test those fears. He raised his wand and spoke clearly. "Periculum." From the tip of his wand erupted a cascade of brilliant, crimson sparks that soared upward like living fireworks. Harry remembered how he had once contained the charm's full brilliance. Now he let it blaze freely. Slowly, he willed the sparks to coalesce into a majestic phoenix, its plumage a swirl of scarlet and gold. The creature hovered for a heartbeat, then arced in a graceful loop, its tail trailing shimmering embers against the high ceiling. A hush fell over the hall. Even Professor Riddle leaned forward, eyes alight with wonder. Harry felt a thrill of triumph. Unable to resist, Riddle reached out and placed his hand among the phoenix's fiery feathers. The magical bird vanished in a soft burst of light, leaving only a warm glow on his palm. A collective gasp rose from the students. "Professor Riddle, be careful," someone cried. "Is your hand all right?" Riddle withdrew it slowly, staring at the faint ember-like marks that glowed on his skin. Then he turned to Harry, a genuine smile touching his lips. "Extraordinary, Mr. Potter. Truly extraordinary." Harry exhaled, relief and exhilaration washing over him. The red spark charm had passed the test, and in doing so, it had revealed something neither he nor Tom Riddle would soon forget. The entire classroom held its breath as Harry Potter stepped forward, everyone expecting him to administer artificial respiration to the crumpled Ravenclaw student. A tense few seconds passed, then nothing happened. The girls in the front row both sighed and groaned, relieved that their classmate was unharmed, yet disappointed that the dramatic rescue they'd fantasized about never came to pass. "Ravenclaw, 10 points, Professor Riddle announced, flashing Harry a curt nod of thanks. "You may return to your seat, Mr. Potter." As Harry sat down, Riddle drew his wand and swept it through the air. Instantly, the torches dimmed and a single spotlight illuminated the heavy curtain behind him. In glowing letters appeared, "Magic in the Muggle World." A ripple of excitement ran through the students. "I recognize that," one second-year whispered. "It's a movie." "It's definitely from the Muggle cinema," added another. A hand shot up. "But Professor, this is Defense Against the Dark Arts class. Why call our lesson Magic in the Muggle World?" Riddle allowed him elf the tiniest of smiles. "If you've done the reading I assigned, you'll understand my choice of words. Defense Against the Dark Arts isn't merely about warding off dark magic. It's also about mastering curses, counter-curses, and yes, even the poisons and charms used in Muggle lore. Tonight we will explore how Muggle magic, their illusions, their potions, their stage tricks, offer insight into our own defensive and offensive spells. Sometimes, understanding your opponent's trickery is the best defense of all." He tapped the spotlight again, and the words faded. "Settle in, please. Class is about to begin." Quiet descended on the room as Riddle raised his wand, ready to traverse the blurred line between wizarding and Muggle magic, and to teach his students the art of defense from every angle. "In my opinion, these Muggle weapons pose a far greater threat than any dark magic," Riddle began, gesturing toward the enchanted screen behind him. One by one, detailed images flickered into view. Pistols, sniper rifles, cannons, each accompanied by specifications, destructive capacity, and the closest magical equivalent. He paused to let the information sink in. For instance, the average wizard won't learn the spell comparable to a handgun's firepower until their 5th year at Hogwarts. Yet Muggles are already producing these weapons by the thousands. Riddle tapped the screen, which now displayed price comparisons. A standard pistol costs about £250, roughly 50 gold galleons. That's the same price you'd pay Ollivander for an undiscounted wand. The difference is stark. Wands take skill, patience, years of training, and a skilled wand maker can turn out at most 3 in a day. With a flourish, he changed the slide to show production figures for a typical Muggle arms factory. In contrast, an average factory can crank out 50 pistols every day. No fine craftsmanship required. Just pull a trigger, and even a child can do it. He let the reality of those numbers hang in the air before concluding earnestly, "That is why it's imperative we study these weapons as rigorously as we study magic. If we don't, we'll never stand a chance against an enemy armed with mass-produced firepower." Chapter 87, Voldemort's Defense Against the Dark Arts class. Harry sat back in his seat, mulling over Professor Riddle's lecture. On the one hand, the Dark Lord's heir had made some excellent points. Wizards have long dismissed the threat posed by Muggle weaponry, even though firearms can be deadlier than many curses. Technically, that's something Muggle studies could cover, but no one ever does. Wizards have simply chosen to ignore it. But this was Defense Against the Dark Arts, not Muggle studies. Its whole purpose is to teach students how to defend themselves, If guns really are as dangerous as Riddle claimed, shouldn't we be learning how to counter them? How was a second-year witch or wizard supposed to deal with a man waving a revolver? Harry glanced around the room. Several of his classmates were already raising their hands, no doubt with the same question. Some would argue that Riddle's focus on Muggle arms only proved how perilous ordinary people could be, and justified the need for statutes keeping us hidden. Still, defense against the dark arts demanded more than theory. If guns were the new dark arts, our instructor owed us practical countermeasures, just as he would show us how to ward off an Avada Kedavra. Professor Riddle met Harry's eye, then swept his gaze slowly across the classroom. A thin smile curved his lips. "An excellent question," he said smoothly. "This evening, we will learn precisely how to defend ourselves against Muggle weapons." He raised his wand, and the torches along the walls flickered, plunging the room into a tense half-light. "If we skip this section," Professor Riddle announced, "our defense against the dark arts course will become no different from Muggle studies." A hush fell over the classroom. Every student sat up straighter, eyes fixed on him. They'd known something like this was coming. Ever since Riddle's opening remarks had eroded their confidence in the future of wizarding defense. A few Muggle-born students were already talking about signing up for summer Muggle World courses, just to feel they weren't helpless. Riddle let the silence stretch a moment before flicking to the next slide. The flicker of the projector cast a crisp image on the screen, a Muggle firmly gripping a handgun, the barrel pointed slightly downward but still menacing. "These," he said, voice suddenly brisk and precise, "are the weapons you must learn to neutralize. Though they seem fearsome, they're merely constructs of dark magic, easily disrupted by second-year charms." As he spoke, bullet point annotations scrolled in beside the photograph. Muzzle velocities, impact angles, magical countermeasures, yet not one student dared look at them. They were entirely absorbed by Riddle's calm authority, hanging on every word rather than the data on the screen. "In this class," he continued, "we'll strip away the mystique of Muggle armaments. By the end of the term, a simple disarming charm will render them harmless, and if you master your spells, you'll face far worse in the field without flinching." He paused, letting the weight of that promise sink in. The students exchanged glances. For the first time since term began, they felt something stir. A spark of determination, fueled by the knowledge that even Muggle weapons, so long feared, could be overcome by magic. Professor Riddle paused at the front of the classroom, letting his words hang in the air. "Now let's consider Muggle weapons," he continued, his tone taking on an edge of solemnity. "Their destructive power and straightforward operation, no hours of wand work required, make them as relevant to our defense against the dark arts curriculum as any curse or hex." He swept his gaze across the students' faces. "The very purpose of this class is to teach you how to protect yourselves. And make no mistake, if you don't understand Muggle arms, you leave yourselves vulnerable. One bullet to the head or the heart, and it doesn't matter how powerful a witch or wizard you are. You're dead. No magic will save you then." He flicked his hand, and the blackboard B behind him sprang to life with a crude charcoal sketch of a modern firearm. "Imagine you leave the leaky cauldron late one night," he said, voice low. "You're walking through a dimly lit Muggle street when a stumbling drunk pulls out this device. One moment, you're minding your own business. The next, he points the barrel at you and fires. That single shot, fired from a weapon that costs all of 50 galleons, can end your life." The students exchanged startled glances, the weight of his words sinking in. Professor Riddle allowed a small, satisfied smile to play at his lips. "From your expressions, I see you understand the gravity of the situation. Remember this lesson well. In a confrontation with Muggles, ignorance isn't bliss, it's fatal." Riddle stood at the head of the lecture hall, surveying the rows of students with cool detachment. "No matter how skilled you are at transfiguration," he began, voice low, "no matter how many O's you earn in charms, none of it will save you if you're already dead." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, then sighed. "Now, please turn your attention to this image." With a flick of his wand, he brought up a diagram on the enchanted screen behind him. A murmur swept through the audience. This looked far more straightforward than they'd anticipated. If it's really this simple, Riddle continued, even first years could pull it off. All you need is transfiguration. You don't have to invent some strange new form for the Muggle's weapon. Just aim your spell at the gun in their hand. Or, if you're fast enough, target the bullet in mid-flight and transform it directly. He tapped a pointer on the diagram. The initial maneuver is basic. Anyone who's completed first-year transfiguration can handle it. The bullet transformation requires a bit more finesse, but it's nothing beyond a typical 6th year's capability. He glanced around, evidently intending to move on, when a hand shot up. Dark-skinned and seated near the back, Michael's raised arm was almost swallowed by the shadows, but it was unmistakably there. Riddle's train of thought hiccuped. He hadn't expected a question, especially not about the bullet transformation he'd brushed past so quickly. For the first time that afternoon, his expression flickered with genuine curiosity. Professor Riddle nearly missed the raised hand until he caught sight of the student's faintly bared white teeth. He paused, cleared his throat, and addressed the classroom. "Yes, Michael?" Michael shifted in his seat. "Professor, why is bullet transfiguration only taught in 6th year? We learned to transfigure living creatures in 1st grade. Our exam was turning a mouse into a snuff box. Since living beings are more complex than inanimate objects, I don't understand why bullets are considered so advanced." Professor Riddle nodded approvingly. "An excellent question. The real challenge with a bullet is its speed. The moment a firearm is discharged, the projectile is traveling too fast for you to complete a spoken incantation. By the time you finish the words, the bullet has already passed your line of sight." He straightened his robes. "That's why bullet transfiguration is reserved for when you've mastered the silent spell. This is an advanced casting technique you learn in your 6th year. No verbal component, just pure thought. Only a silent spell reacts quickly enough to intercept something moving faster than the blink of an eye." He scanned the room. "Any other questions?" No one raised a hand. Professor Riddle allowed himself a small smile before continuing. "Now, let's discuss why we focus on transforming the bullet rather than the gun itself. There are 2 reasons. First, a firearm's mechanism is extraordinarily delicate. Any miscast could irreparably damage its intricate parts. Just look at its design," Professor Riddle said, sweeping his hand over the disassembled pistol on the rostrum. "If any single component fails, the entire mechanism jams. Its firing power comes from gunpowder, and gunpowder only works when the ratio of chemica, LS, is exact. Cast a spell that disturbs either the mixture or the powder itself, and the weapon becomes nothing more than harmless metal. Furthermore, timing is everything. If you try to transfigure a loaded gun into, say, a bouquet of flowers, your spell must be instantaneous. Hesitate for even a fraction of a second, and you'll be shot before the transformation takes hold." He checked the ornate clock on the wall. With a deft flick of his wand, the classroom lights brightened, the heavy curtains soared up, and the pale projection beam winked out. "Longbottom," he called, spotting Neville gathering his books. "Class isn't over yet." Startled, Neville sank back into his chair. "Sorry, Professor. I thought—" Riddle raised a cool eyebrow. "You thought what, Mr. Longbottom?" "Ah, I thought since my toad was missing, you'd let me go find it." With another subtle wave of his wand, a plump, muddy toad materialized in Neville's outstretched hands. The boy's face broke into a grin, and he cuddled the creature like a long-lost friend. All the while, Voldemort watched from the back of the room, his dark eyes unreadable. Though Neville wasn't nearly as timid as he'd been when they first met, one thing remained the same. He still doted on his toad. Harry, standing nearby, pressed a hand to his forehead and sighed in exasperation. Chapter 88, Voldemort's Defense Against the Dark Arts, Part 2. Neville's answer drew a collective sigh from the assembled students and onlookers. Not that Professor Riddle didn't know how to inject drama into his lessons. He simply felt it was unnecessary. A class was a class, he believed, so long as his students remained focused on what he taught. "Now," Riddle said, leaning on his desk and fixing the room with a cold stare, "tell me why we don't simply use spells on the easier target, Muggles. After all, an intensified wand lighting charm could blind one in an instant, and even a basic Confundus charm would leave a Muggle utterly disoriented." At that, Lisa Dupin shot her hand into the air. She'd been eager to answer ever since Michael and Neville had had their moments in the Dark Lord's glare. Watching Riddle acknowledge them first had pricked her pride. "Not bad," Riddle murmured after a moment. "Anyone else? Harry, what's your take?" The professor's red eyes settled on Harry Potter. Harry rose in his seat and spoke clearly. "Aside from transfiguration, any offensive spell can harm a muggle, and we mustn't overlook firearms. Under a confundus charm, a muggle might involuntarily pull the trigger, potentially injuring or even killing themselves or someone else." Riddle inclined his head, a thin smile curving his lips. "Exactly. Their fragility is precisely why they become so perilous when armed." "Very well." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before moving on to the next topic, each student acutely aware that in this classroom, every answer counted. "Excellent work today. Your consideration for Muggle safety was spot on. But let's be clear, if a Muggle under our care were to die because of one of your combat spells, anything other than transfiguration, and the Ministry got wind of it, you'd be the one facing Azkaban. The Statute of Secrecy demands we protect Muggles at all costs. So when you confront an armed Muggle, don't cast directly at him, disarm or disable the weapon itself. For your homework, I want a short, one-foot essay on today's lesson. You're free to choose your own angle and style, and Ravenclaw, 5 house points, for creativity in your practical exercise. Class dismissed." Professor Riddle closed his notebook, and the room practically exploded. Led by Lisa Dupin, the Ravenclaws abandoned every bit of decorum. They surged to their feet, chattering and laughing, and pressed eagerly toward the door. No orderly rows, no polite goodbyes, just a boisterous rush like outrunners chasing a snitch. Even the prospect of Peeves' next prank couldn't slow them down. The poltergeist still bore a grudge against Ravenclaw. Ever since Harry Potter's last year visit, he'd singled out Harry's classmates for special torment. But today, that threat was nothing more than a buzzing in the background. "That's it. 1 foot is enough," Lisa called over her shoulder, stuffing her quill into her satchel as she joined the stampede into the corridor. Ron trudged alongside Harry, arms crossed and brow furrowed. "Honestly, who cares who it is?" he grumbled. "Why do we have to switch our second-year homework from meters to feet? The Ministry of Magic really is something else." Harry chuckled. "I heard they uncovered a few dark wizards hiding in Hufflepuff. They probably want more precise measurements now." At the mention of Hufflepuff, Terry Weasley, Ron's younger brother, fell silent. Harry noticed the usual spark in Terry's eyes had dimmed. Terry, like their brother Percy, dreamed of working at the Ministry one day. "Don't worry," Terry said abruptly, lifting his chin. "Dad's in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. He may not be high up, but he helps draft the laws." He gave Ron a triumphant poke. "You know the Muggle Protection Act? Dad was one of its main drafters." Ron straightened instantly, pride banishing his irritation. Thinking of their father's role not only boosted his spirits, but also gave him a clever shortcut for their homework. He tossed Harry an impish grin. Harry shook his head, smiling to himself. He realized that true friendship wasn't about how long you'd known someone. In just a few weeks, he already understood Ron perfectly, even when Ron's only clue was the cheeky way he stuck out his tongue. Harry could even pick up on the whispered rumors about him and Ron from last year. As they walked down the corridor, Terry Boot, still visibly wound up, muttered beside him, "I could send a letter to my father about today's lesson. Knowing him, if I post it by midday, he'll have a reply off to me before dinner time, and I'm sure it'll be full of useful insights. I could quote him in class, too." Beside Terry, his twin brothers Anthony and Michael slipped arms around his shoulders, gently steering him back from the edge of excitement. Ron leaned close, eyes alight. "And imagine what Dad could do. He could change the laws from here on out if he really wanted to." Terry shook his head. "Why bother with your dad? In the past, the Ministry was utterly hopeless, stuck in the old ways. Why wait for them to act? Can't I make things happen myself?" Harry didn't have time to mediate their debate. He cut in, pointing down the corridor. "Look, Peeves." Sure enough, the poltergeist was floating toward the 4th floor, more solid in appearance than any of the castle's usual phantoms. Even from a distance, his cheeky grin and erratic swagger left no doubt in Harry's mind. Chaos was close at hand. He was a small man with sharp, dark eyes and an impossibly wide grin. His hair was as black as a raven's wing, and he always dressed in the oddest, brightest colors, a bell-topped hat that tinkled with every move, an orange bow tie that squeaked if you tugged it. He floated through the corridors like a restless spirit, could snatch objects out of your hands, vanish at will. All facts Harry had gathered from whispers and distant glimpses. He'd never actually met the fellow. His own awkwardness seemed to keep Peeves at bay. But now Peeves looked positively gleeful, mouth stretched into a devilish grin, the universal signal for mischief ahead. And Harry knew exactly who was in the poltergeist's sights. Ginny. Today was their first charms lesson, and the classroom sat on the 4th floor, just around the corner. Peeves is after Ginny, Harry hissed, face drained of color. Ron's eyes went wide. We have charms first period. Quick! They bolted up the stairs without another word. Neville, Terry, and the others stared in confusion, trailing behind as the pair raced off. Harry didn't need to explain. He knew that so long as he made it to the charms classroom first, Peeves would back off. His weird aversion to Harry Potter would leave Ginny and the Ravenclaws safe from any prank. And as they burst through the classroom doors, there stood Professor Flitwick, already arranging his quills and parchment on the lectern. "Professor," Ron panted, "thank goodness you're here." Flitwick looked up, eyebrows arching. "Is there a problem, Mr. Weasley? Mr. Potter?" Harry offered a relieved smile. "Not anymore, sir." Harry paused amid the commotion. Peeves wasn't really aiming at Ginny and the others. After all, Professor Flitwick was standing right there. Peeves would be more likely to torment Filch than pester students under Flitwick's watch. Ron blinked as it suddenly clicked. "Why is Ryan here? And so fast?" he muttered, nodding toward the boy chatting with Luna just a few paces away. Ginny, looking more agitated than ever, trailed behind him. "That's Ryan," Ron added uneasily. "He always shows up out of nowhere." Harry could only shake his head. He knew exactly how Ryan managed these impossible entrances, the enchanted necklace that let him create multiple forms of himself. Across the courtyard, Ginny finally spotted Harry. After a moment's hesitation, she broke into a run and hurried in his direction. Chapter 89, Ginny and Harry. Ryan thought to himself, what a genuinely good guy Harry was. He'd never expected that Ginny Weasley could resist his, well, let's call it his personal aura. It wasn't because he'd slipped her a love potion or muttered some clandestine charm. No, Ryan's presence alone was enough to make ordinary witches lose their composure. That overwhelming attention was precisely why he kept himself hidden most of the time, enduring relentless stares and living life as a supercharged version of Harry Potter. No thanks. He knew all too well that it wasn't a real life. He'd tested his detection skill once by simply standing in a crowd and nearly got swallowed by a pack of infatuated women. Only one little witch, Penello, remained perfectly unfazed. That encounter taught him a valuable lesson. This power was more curse than gift. So why was Ginny different? It made sense, Ryan realized, when he remembered how Ginny had grown up on stories of Harry Potter's bravery. To her, he wasn't just another boy. He was the embodiment of every heroic tale she'd ever heard. When Ron Weasley befriended Harry, he spoke of him so admiringly that Ginny's own admiration deepened without her even noticing. So when Ginny brushed past Ryan's charming companion to greet Harry with that familiar, wholehearted smile, it wasn't rudeness, it was destiny. After all, Ginny Weasley's heart had belonged to Harry Potter long before Ryan ever arrived. And in that moment, Ryan could only watch and understand. Helena, for her part, dismissed Harry as merely a well-connected boy, yet she knew exactly what he'd think the moment she arranged Ginny beside that handsome blonde leaning against Luna's desk. And Ginny, for her part, reveled in the attention. From the look on Harry's face, her intuition whispered one thing: he was jealous. Jealous that she'd caught someone else's eye, so jealous that it made him uneasy. Ginny never suspected Harry had stolen the idea from Ron. Instead, she decided the mysterious fellow was none other than Draco Malfoy. She let a slow, teasing smile play on her lips, certain her reaction would only rile Harry further. Unable to hold back, Ron cleared his throat and said in a stage whisper, "I'm your brother." Ginny fluttered her eyelashes, feigning innocence. "Of course you are. You're the only Ravenclaw I call brother," she replied sweetly. Harry let out a soft laugh beside them. He'd always been the sentimental one, not the stern guardian. And honestly, the swirling rumors about Harry, Ron, and Draco had made Ginny far bolder than she'd ever been in their original timeline. She had learned early on that love is its own kind of warfare, nothing like the strategic battles Hermione once taught her about. Hermione's little jealousy play was simple. Line up a few admirers who genuinely liked her, then let the object of her real affections see her attention elsewhere, so he'd realize how much he stood to lose and that he really was wanted. In the original timeline, that was why she paraded around with Victor Krum and an overconfident Cormac McLaggen. Ginny's strategy, though, suited her even better. She'd inherited that bold, square-jawed look Westerners find so striking, plus a sprinkling of freckles and a mane of vivid red hair. She didn't have to recruit any high-profile suitors to prove her worth. All she had to do was let Harry see her at her most radiant. So when Ron teased her across the Great Hall, Ginny simply tossed her hair, tilted her head into the lantern light, and offered Harry a coy smile. Almost without thinking, she slipped her hand around his arm, as if startled by her brother's barbs. Watching from a few tables away, Ryan's face lit up. Plain Jane Ginny Weasley, even in his cold estimation, could be daring enough to flirt with Harry Potter? If she could do that, what did it mean for him? Of course, Ginny's boldness wasn't purely spontaneous. It was a perfect cover for the brief flutter of attraction she'd shown to Ryan earlier, an uncharacteristic lapse she was desperate to obscure. Bet her to ignore Ron entirely and throw herself wholeheartedly into catching Harry's eye. In that moment, if Harry could have spoken aloud the thought racing through his head, it would have been this: "You're my goddess." Ryan hesitated, his finger poised over Harry's sleeve, as if ready to pull him aside for another round of teasing. In fact, Harry had just warned him about a loose bludger on the Quidditch pitch, saving him from an iron fist, so part of Ryan felt he owed Harry at least a measure of gratitude. But at Harry's next words, any goodwill vanished. "That crazy girl?" Harry muttered, an edge of disdain in his voice. Ryan's jaw clenched. How dare Harry dismiss Luna Lovegood like that? His momentary sympathy evaporated. "Don't you dare call Luna crazy," he growled, stepping between Harry and Ron. Ron shrugged, unbothered. "I'm just saying, she's a bit out there." Before Ron could continue, Ginny Weasley spun around, her glare as fiery as their mother's. "Ronald, teaching Harry to insult Luna? She is not a bit out there. She's brilliant and kind." Ron's shoulders slumped. Even Fred and George, spotting Ginny's fury from a mile off, wouldn't have dared argue. Ron ducked his head like a beaten sheep. Ginny crossed her arms, her voice growing quieter but no less firm. "You know, Luna and Ryan both have those silvery eyes. It's so distinct, I can't help wondering if they might be related somehow." Harry's eyebrows shot up. "Silvery eyes?" Ginny shot him a pointed look. "Look at them, both of you. It's uncanny." Ryan felt heat rise to his cheeks. Suddenly, Ginny's fiery defense of Luna stung more than anything Harry had said. Luna wasn't, in Ginny's words, cute the way a Weasley was. Yet here was Ginny, so ready to leap to her defense. And if Ryan ended up caring more about Luna than Ginny? Ginny's expression softened, though Ryan sensed a flicker of hurt still in her amber gaze. She cleared her throat politely. "Anyway, what brings you two here? Are you on your way to see Professor Flitwick?" Ryan forced a nod, his earlier resolve in tatters. Between Luna's silent dignity and Ginny's unexpected protectiveness, the last thing he wanted was to pick a fight. He opened his mouth to answer, wondering suddenly which choice would hurt less, crossing Ginny's glare or betraying Luna's quiet kindness. Ginny cocked her head, curiosity shining in her eyes. "No, we're the ones worried about you. Harry just saw Peeves, and we're afraid he'll take it out on you first years." Ron folded his arms, frustration clear in his voice. "As your brother, shouldn't he at least check on his little sister?" Ginny's face broke into a smile so bright it felt like sunlight. Her voice rang out, filled with delight. "Harry, you're worried about me!" "It's us!" Ron muttered under his breath, but Ginny neither saw nor heard him. In that moment, the corridor seemed to shrink until it held only the two of them, the distant echoes of footsteps and laughter fading into silence. Harry didn't answer. Instead, he felt his chest tighten, as though a golden snitch were fluttering frantically inside him. He turned to look at Ginny, and for an instant, fleeting memories of Helena and Chu Zhang flickered through his mind, strangers whose faces he couldn't fully recall. Then, just as suddenly, They vanished, leaving only Ginny standing beside him in the hush of the empty corridor. Chapter 90. Dumbledore hesitates. Let's set aside the much-gossiped moment between Harry and Ginny, everyone's eyes were on them after all, and turn instead to the headmaster's office at Hogwarts. It was late afternoon, and the firelight danced on the gleaming silverwares and great portraits of past headmasters that lined the walls. In the center of the room, Albus Dumbledore stood before something extraordinary, a delicate, translucent crown hovering in midair. "It's astonishing," Dumbledore murmured, his eyes alight with curiosity. He reached out, letting his fingertips pass through the pearly white circle of metal and mist. It felt cool to the touch, like brushing through a sheet of ice, or like passing through a spirit. From just above the polished floor floated a figure in long, silvery robes. Helena Ravenclaw, the Grey Lady herself. Her waist-length hair shimmered in ghostly light, and her slender form seemed almost part of the curving, translucent crown. "Professor," she said in her soft, distant voice, "I tried to replicate my mother's diadem using the same magic that bound me here. What you see is, shall we say, a spectral copy. It grants the wearer the same clarity of mind as the true Ravenclaw diadem. The condition, of course, is that one must already be a ghost, and after enough time has passed, the crown returns to me, as any robe would return to its owner." Dumbledore stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Incredible. A diadem that can be worn by spirits and reclaims itself afterward." He lifted a hand, suppressing the thrill of discovery. "Helena, this could change everything we know about incorporeal, or should I say, post-corporeal, magic." A faint, wistful smile touched the Grey Lady's lips. "I'd have refused the effort at first," she admitted, "had I known how freeing it feels to share in the living world again, even for a moment. But now that it's done, I hope my little experiment may be of service." Just then, Dumbledore's eyes flicked toward the portrait of Phineas Nigellus. The old headmaster's painted face leered down from its frame. Dumbledore turned back to Helena, a new idea already forming. "If we can refine this process, imagine the possibilities," he said quietly. "Ghosts wearing artifacts, artifacts infused with soul-tethered magic, perhaps even creating spirit-bound objects for the living. There's so much to explore." Helena bowed her head in agreement, and the diadem drifted slowly back toward her hand, dissolving into mist the moment it touched her wrist. Dumbledore watched it settle, uncertain how far or how fast to push such revolutionary magic. For the first time in a very long while, the venerable wizard hesitated. "If this really works," Dumbledore mused, leaning back in his chair, "then ghosts could partake in all the pleasures of the physical world. At that point, what would distinguish a ghost from the living? Perhaps by consuming ghost-infused cuisine, they might even reclaim the magical powers of a wizard. Phineas, you may be right. It's a revolutionary discovery that could upend everything we know about magical life." He paused, the corners of his mouth curling into a gentle smile. "And yet, I think I'd still prefer a natural death. My family awaits me in the life beyond." At that, Helena's expression darkened. She let the suspended crown slip through her fingers, then vanished silently into the floor. Dumbledore glanced toward the doorway, just as a handsome young man entered the office. He blinked at the floating crown, then his gaze shifted to the headmaster. "Miss Grey?" he asked hesitantly. With a flick of his wand, Dumbledore conjured a long dining table, groaning under platters of roast, pastries, fruits, and cheeses. Chairs materialized behind them, as inviting as if they'd stood there for years. The young man, Tom Riddle, arched an eyebrow. "Why, Miss Grey? I could have sworn you used to call her Helena." Dumbledore settled into his seat, poured himself a glass of gin, and gave a small, indulgent smack of his lips. "People change their titles, Tom, but the past has a habit of catching up." Riddle offered a faint, knowing smile. Clearly, this wasn't his first meal in the headmaster's office. Tom Riddle paused outside the Ravenclaw common room, his dark eyes fixed on the heavy oak door. He whispered to the empty corridor, "I have no feelings for her. All I want is the Ravenclaw diadem. It's safer if I keep my distance, lest she yearn for me again." A familiar chuckle drifted from the shadows. "Ruthless as always," came Albus Dumbledore's voice, warm yet teasing. The headmaster stepped into the lamplight, his silver beard catching a glow. "This is exactly what your original self would have said. Even then, Tom, you were already a Horcrux." Don't get too high and mighty. You're still a child in this body. Tom shrugged, expression cool and tight. Perhaps, but you and I both know I'm bound to spend centuries at Hogwarts, first as a defense against the dark arts professor, and eventually as headmaster. She's like a ghost, haunting my every thought. It's best I cut this pointless bond now. Dumbledore's eyes softened. After 1,000 years, Miss Grey remains the same, still under Rowena Ravenclaw's shadow, still spoilt, self-righteous, brimming with confidence. Yes, she's beautiful, but her pride in magic, when she's so ordinary, bemuses me. Tom frowned, recalling distant moments. You must remember, I wasn't drawn to the diadem alone. Her magical talent intrigued me even more. After all, she is the daughter of Ravenclaw herself. The headmaster stepped closer, concern in his gaze. Ambition and control have always guided you, Tom, but beware, even the most intentional distance can loom larger than any bond you sever. Tom's lips curved in a cold half-smile as he looked back at the portrait-guarded door. I have no feelings for her, he repeated, though his lingering glance suggested otherwise. I was disappointed, he admitted, swirling the last drops of wine in his glass. The Grey Lady, the ghost of Ravenclaw Tower, turned out to be nothing more than an empty shell. After all those centuries, I expected depth, cunning, even a spark of real power. Instead, she's as hollow as a straw doll. Dumbledore raised an inquisitive brow. You mean Helena Ravenclaw herself? Tom Riddle nodded. Precisely. She drifts these halls with more vanity than substance. Even Bellatrix Lestrange, mad as she is, has genuine talent in the dark arts and at least keeps conversation lively. With the Grey Lady, I found myself nodding off. We chatted so long, I ended up slumping onto her dusty four-poster just to stay awake. Let's leave her be for now, Dumbledore said, folding his hands. He leaned forward, eyes serious. What intrigued me most today was your encounter with Harry Potter. How did you find him? Riddle let out a low chuckle. Potter's magic. It's exceptional. Had he shown even a fraction of malice, he could have been undone long ago, far worse than that cursed locket you once asked me to guard. And yet, I noticed he hasn't even begun to tap his full potential. Dumbledore smiled, waving his wand. At once, a shimmering image appeared above the desk. Harry in Professor Lupin's Defense Against the Dark Arts class, earnest and determined as he answered a difficult question. See there? Dumbledore said softly. The real wonder of Potter isn't just raw talent, it's the heart that drives it. He approaches every challenge with honesty and compassion, qualities that, in the end, matter more than power alone. Chapter 8, Shades of Power. The study was dimly lit, the only sound the soft crackle of the fire in the hearth. Tom Riddle stood before Professor Dumbledore's desk, his dark eyes gleaming in the low light. He spoke calmly, almost contemptuously. Think about Harry Potter, Riddle said. Even when a thug threatened his life, he drew on something deeper than any spellbook. You claim that Lily's sacrifice protects him, but that magic, as formidable as it is, isn't all there is. Even if we replicated every condition of Harry's situation, we couldn't harness his power. That strength comes from his heart. It's something we can never learn. Dumbledore leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. A trace of a smile flickered at the corners of his mouth. If we cannot learn it, Tom, he said softly, shall we simply abandon the quest? Magic does not exist in only two forms, black or white. There is gray, too, and myriad shades beyond our current understanding. One needn't be purely good or purely evil to wield great power. Resolve of spirit, clarity of purpose, these are strengths in their own right. Riddle's lip curled in a half-smirk. Take Ravenclaw, for instance. We think of her as the epitome of kindness and wisdom, but she was as cunning as any Slytherin. She filched countless volumes from this very castle's library, books no one else dared approach. Yet she was neither wholly malevolent nor indiscriminately benevolent. She struck out in pursuit of knowledge others considered impossible. In the end, she devised a magic no one, the Big Four, or any wizard in history, could rival. Admit it, Albus, Riddle said, his voice dropping to a chill whisper. Love is overrated. It's merely another branch of magic, nothing more. Dumbledore's smile faded. He drummed his fingers on the desk, eyes distant, as if weighing some unseen future. After a moment, he spoke, more to himself than to Riddle. Perhaps you're right. Perhaps it is just another school of magic, one we have yet to master. But does that mean we should shun it? Tom, should I continue this research? If we can study and ultimately conquer it. He trailed off, letting the question hang in the smoky air. Dumbledore's reputation rested on his wisdom, his ability to foresee the paths magic might take. He knew that knowledge itself was neither good nor evil. Even if he chose not to pursue the secrets behind Lily's protection, someone else inevitably would. And magic, once discovered, could never be unlearned. Silence settled between them, broken only by the fire's dying embers. Two great minds faced a crossroads, one convinced that strength lay beyond the bonds of love, the other torn between caution and the irresistible draw of forbidden knowledge. The next move would shape not only their own destinies, but the future of the wizarding world itself. But if you actually studied it, you could at least steer its effects, and even shape the future of the wizarding world, Riddle taunted, his voice laced with sarcasm. Chapter 91. Minister of Magic, Ms. Bones? Silence filled the headmaster's office. Even the portraits lining the walls had fallen still, their painted eyes fixed on the two figures at the center of the room. Albus Dumbledore studied the floating crown with an inscrutable expression, while Tom Riddle lounged nearby, sipping gin as though he were merely watching a performance. At last, Dumbledore released a long, heavy sigh. The ethereal crown dissolved into thin air, only to reappear moments later atop Ms. Grey's head. An ordinary witch or wizard might have assumed the crown was bound by a timer, vanishing once its moment passed. Riddle, however, knew better. A magical crown always finds its rightful bearer. He was about to quip that the Sorting Hat would have no trouble placing him in his favorite house when a sudden noise interrupted him. The oak door swung open with a crash, and Remus Lupin strode in, his face drawn and eyes wide with urgency. "Remus, what's wrong?" Dumbledore asked, voice sharpened by concern. Lupin was the very picture of calm and courtesy. If he rushed in like this, the news could only be serious. Lupin caught sight of Riddle, paused, then squared his shoulders. Dumbledore met his gaze. "You can trust Tom as much as you trust me," the headmaster said quietly. Lupin took a breath. "Amelia Bones," he answered. "She's been appointed Minister of Magic. Why has Fudge resigned, and why haven't we heard a single word from the ministry?" Lupin burst out, his usual reserve giving way to excitement. As someone long marginalized by wizarding society, he held the ministry, and especially the office of minister, in profound respect, even more than many of his closest friends. So when he saw Tom Riddle merely smile and caught Dumbledore's fleeting look of surprise, he was utterly baffled. Riddle's dark eyes gleamed. "At last, the day I've awaited has arrived," he said softly. "Ever since Rita Skeeter's expose, I knew a reckoning was inevitable. Fudge always regarded you, Albus, as a rival, an obstacle to be removed." He paused, savoring the moment. Call it hypocrisy if you like, but his resignation was bound to happen, and though Fudge is gone, Umbridge still walks free. Dumbledore's face grew stern as he turned to Riddle. "You truly live up to your reputation, Tom Riddle, cunning, far-sighted. I'm surprised you even remember the name of that minor official." Riddle's lips curved into a mocking sneer. "Dolores Umbridge is hardly minor. She remains senior deputy minister and sits on the Wizengamot tribunal." His hollow laughter rang through the hall, triumphant and chilling, while Lupin, standing at the edge of the table, frowned, his expression dark with disapproval. In Professor Dumbledore's cluttered office, Tom Riddle leaned against the edge of the great oak desk, arms folded, his dark eyes never leaving the headmaster's face. He let out a short, derisive laugh. "Honestly, Albus," he began, voice low and mocking, "what use is a minister of magic anyway? And since when did conjuring a corporeal Patronus become the golden ticket to the Wizengamot? It's a joke." Dumbledore's calm blue eyes narrowed, and for a moment his fine, silvered brows drew together in silent reproach. Riddle stopped himself from pressing the point further. He cleared his throat and adopted a more measured tone. "I've done my part, nothing more," he said. "I delivered the letter and provided the evidence. After that, I stepped aside and let Amelia Bones take the reins. She's more than capable." He paused, letting the words hang between them. "I suspect there's far worse scandal buried in the ministry's coffers. Bribes, embezzlement, misuse of public resources. Fudge and Caro have grown fat on every little loophole and privilege, lining their pockets while the rest of us suffer. My little dossier alone wouldn't have been enough to make the ministry hush up its own corruption. so you can be sure there's a mountain of dirt I haven't even touched." At that admission, Dumbledore's tension seemed to ebb away. His stern expression softened, and he inclined his head ever so slightly, as though in reluctant approval of Riddle's restraint. A faint, knowing smile curved the corners of his mouth. Silence settled in the office like a living thing, and for the first time, the two men simply regarded one another, master and pupil, adversary and ally, bound together by secrets and ambition. He could never have imagined that those two little people in his sights might accomplish anything of real consequence. "I've always believed it wiser to keep my distance from power," he thought. Even now, though Dumbledore himself can't bring himself to speak, Fudge, at least, has never been anything but a kindly soul. Power, well, it's a dangerous thing. In any case, I don't regret refusing a post at the Ministry of Magic. If I'd accepted and then fallen from grace, well, the results could have been disastrous. Dumbledore sighed, smoothing the folds of his robes. "You truly believe that something as absurd as the Minister of Magic could change you? That the one person I truly fear would be vulnerable to so trivial a thing?" Riddle's lips curved in a cold smile. "If that's your conviction, then defeat me is easy. I would simply eliminate every witch and wizard qualified to become minister. You'd have no choice but to accept the post yourself, this poisoned chalice. If you're so fragile, your cherished beliefs in love and justice would collapse under the burden. Then, when you've weakened yourself, I'd emerge and kill you, kill the you who has become broken." Anger flared in Riddle's voice. "How dare you look down on me so? The wizard I fear most, the only one I truly consider my equal, should never be such a pathetic figure." Dumbledore's reply was calm, almost amused. "Congratulations, then, on discovering a new strategy. If you actually carried it out, perhaps I really would fail." "I must say you all look rather down," Albus Dumbledore remarked in an easy tone. Seated on either side of him were Tom Riddle and Remus Lupin, both momentarily speechless. Lupin's lips twitched with indignation. Part of him wanted nothing more than to condemn the Dark Lord himself. Yet here was Dumbledore, calmly inclined beside the man he'd been fighting for years. As a loyal member of the Order of the Phoenix, Lupin had long despised Voldemort. Any sign of rapprochement left him bewildered. He tried to steady his thoughts. If there was anyone in their circle who could remain untainted, it would be Madame Bones. Amelia Bones's integrity was legendary. Crouch Sr., by contrast, had always struck Lupin as too cold and disconnected, and Minister Scrimgeour was far too preoccupied with the Ministry's public image. Besides, old Crouch and his traitorous son were already rotting in Azkaban. Dumbledore tapped his wand lightly against his temple. A stream of silvery threads unfurled and drifted into a shallow stone basin on the floor, a pensieve. Lupin stared, utterly captivated. "This, Remus," Dumbledore said, turning to him with a gentle smile, "is the pensieve. There are moments when my mind becomes perilously overcrowded with memories and musings. I trust you know that sensation. 1,000 voices clamoring at once. When that happens, I siphon the excess into this basin." He inclined his head toward the pensieve. "Now, why not try? Draw out a stray thought, just one, and let it settle here. Once it's separated, you'll see its shape and how it intertwines with other memories far more clearly." Lupin's eyes widened. "So you're saying I can extract my own thoughts?" "Precisely," Dumbledore replied, his eyes twinkling. "Whenever you're ready." Remus swallowed, heart thudding in his chest as he peered into the softly glowing basin. "Is this really a thought?" he whispered. And with that question hanging in the air, he reached out, curiosity and awe warring in his expression as he prepared to experience the pensieve's strange illuminating magic for himself. Although he was a werewolf, his magical aptitude had long kept him hovering near the bottom rungs of the Ministry of Magic. Yet, even that posit ion placed him well above any ordinary Auror. He'd had the boldness to tangle with Alastor Mad-Eye Moody himself, and it was through that confrontation that he'd come to appreciate the staggering power of alchemy, the very art of shaping and storing invisible thoughts. Is that why I find him so fascinating? You of all people should be immune to such temptations. A wizard who so frequently examines his own mind, who prides himself on constant self-reflection, how could he ever be seduced by raw power? Riddle couldn't help but roll his eyes. Chapter 92, Ryan's curiosity. Tom, how does it feel to don a professor's robes for the first time today? And you mentioned your house assignment. Why don't we discuss your remarkable magic instead? Dumbledore's voice was gentle, almost pleading, as he steered the conversation away from the awkward question of houses. One might have expected the young Riddle, ever a fragment of Voldemort, to relish seeing the headmaster grovel. Yet Tom Riddle felt none of the satisfaction logic would dictate. Remus Lupin, seated at Riddle's side, observed the exchange with a shrewd eye. He recognized at once the depth of trust Dumbledore was extending to this gifted yet dangerous student. "All right," Riddle said, inclining his head in acknowledgement. "As a professor, I experience a sense of accomplishment far greater than anything I felt when I founded my club. The ability to instill my own ideas into eager young minds is intoxicating. Now I understand why I clung so tightly to the Defense Against the Dark Arts post, even long after I had risen to power." At those words, Dumbledore's face tightened with concern, while Lupin's expression grew defensive. He knew precisely what club Riddle referred to, the Order of Walpurgis, the secret society that later evolved into the Death Eaters and vanished the moment Voldemort walked away from Hogwarts. Dumbledore exhaled in relief. Somehow, the lesson had gone off without a hitch, thanks, no doubt, to a little well-placed magic. To anyone unfamiliar with its true content, what the students had just studied would seem alarmingly dangerous, so perilous, in fact, that it ought to be kept from both young and ordinary witches and wizards. After all, it was the same forbidden lore Gellert Grindelwald once used to manipulate his followers. Yet Dumbledore recognized a crucial difference between Tom Riddle and Grindelwald. Grindelwald had stoked fear of Muggles without ever acknowledging their humanity, treating them and wizards as two irreconcilable camps. Riddle, by contrast, judging from the hidden inscriptions behind his curtain and his own words in class, seemed to regard wizards as nothing more than Muggles with magic at their fingertips. In Riddle, Dumbledore saw not a tyrant in the making, but a wayward boy who had strayed yet not fully crossed the line into darkness, and who might still be guided back to the right path. Riddle flushed slightly under Dumbledore's steady gaze, but quickly recovered. "As for that new house I mentioned," he said, "it's really no secret. I feel far more at home in Ravenclaw." He went on to outline his personality traits and the direction he hoped his studies would take. Not long after, Professor Lupin quietly slipped out of the room, leaving Riddle to his thoughts and Dumbledore to his cautious hope. He'd said all he'd come to say. Riddle had been talking about the new Defense Against the Dark Arts course. No surprise, since Professor Lupin was slated to serve as its assistant. In truth, that appointment was nothing more than a convenient cover for Lupin's return to Hogwarts. His real duties weren't laid out in any official job description. According to Sirius, Lupin's true assignment was to watch over Harry and make sure Severus Snape didn't lay a finger on him. Yes, Snape, not Voldemort, was the greater threat in Sirius's mind. Even knowing Snape's hidden loyalties, he distrusted a man who had once hated James Potter so fiercely. True, Snape might spare Harry out of respect for Lily's memory, but beyond that, Sirius saw him as unpredictable at best. Voldemort, by contrast, no longer filled him with the same dread. At first, the Dark Lord's name had struck terror into his heart, yet something shifted after that odd birthday meeting between Dumbledore and Tom Riddle. Sirius couldn't fully explain it, but he found himself, and much to his own surprise, willing to give Riddle more credit than he ever would Severus Snape. It wasn't blind faith like McGonagall's and Dumbledore, but it was still more trust than he could ever summon for Snape. When Lupin finally rose to leave, Riddle's voice cut off abruptly. Either he'd simply stopped mid-thought, or he'd already moved on to another subject. Sirius couldn't tell which. After a moment's silence, Riddle circled back to Dumbledore's earlier suggestion. "Magic. Do you have any real idea how it works?" he asked. "Sometimes I hate how clever I can be. From that counterfeit Philosopher's Stone, I learned to trace and project images of any location, just like the lesson you gave us. And now I've begun to grasp the basics on my own." Dumbledore paused, a mysterious gleam in his eye. Riddle leaned forward. "The basics of what exactly? How far have you taken it?" "You'll see this evening," Dumbledore replied, his voice light but certain. Unseen by either of them, Ryan had listened to the entire exchange from a hidden corner of the headmaster's office. In truth, he had been ready ever since first meeting Luna and then Ginny, two encounters that left him hungry for more knowledge. His fascination centered on the crown itself. Could Dumbledore really unravel its secrets? After all, the magic involved wasn't especially deep, especially for a sixth-level wizard like Dumbledore, who had mastered the spells hidden within the original stone with ease. Yet as Ryan watched the headmaster examine the crown, he was surprised. Once again, no hint of the Death God's will appeared. Dumbledore was delving into a branch of magic powerful enough to shake the very foundations of the afterlife, and yet he seemed completely indifferent. Had he convinced himself that only witches and wizards could choose to linger on as ghosts, while muggles simply faded away, their deaths unworthy of notice? And if inanimate objects could be ghostified, why not living beings? Did Fudge truly believe Dumbledore couldn't push his experiments that far? A flicker of disappointment sparked in Ryan's chest. His carefully laid plan to confront the Grim Reaper in the mortal world was already unraveling. That failure explained his sudden pivot to the headmaster's office. He'd long suspected the fireworks that would erupt when Fudge, and especially Umbridge, set their sights on Voldemort. Even if this Dark Lord was still in his youth, that hardly made him someone to provoke. In the original timeline, they dared rile Dumbledore only because of his kindness and because he kept a deliberate distance from ministry politics. Had he been more deeply entangled in power plays, they never would have succeeded in ousting him during Harry's 5th year. If the minister had known the full extent of Fudge's betrayals, he surely would have forced him out and installed someone far more dependable. Honestly, Ryan had never imagined Fudge would be so reckless as to sell out the British wizarding community's interests. Even Amelia Bones, who loathed covering up misconduct, felt compelled to bury the real story behind his resignation. In the wizarding world, national loyalties run deeper than they do among muggles. You might endure incompetence, corruption, or even embezzlement, but there is one sin that no wizarding society will tolerate: betraying your country to a foreign magical power. Ryan could barely contain his excitement at the thought of Dumbledore's reaction when he discovered what Fudge had done. After all, it was Dumbledore who had championed him. No wonder Ryan kept glancing toward the headmaster's office, heart-pounding. Now, like Tom Riddle himself, he was consumed by one question: what would happen tonight? What extraordinary magic was Dumbledore preparing, and how far would he go to right this terrible wrong? Chapter 93, Head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. This one isn't it. That one isn't it either. And this one, definitely not. Ron paced the length of the great hall, eyeing every incoming owl. He jabbed a finger at the flurry of letters overhead. Why hasn't Zhu Weijun arrived yet? Harry sighed and leaned back against a table. Why don't you do your own homework, Ron? And have you noticed the ghosts are all gone? Ron flopped into a chair, folding his arms. I have, if it means I can't procrastinate. He glared at Harry. And surely you've wondered where they went. They must have drifted off to see Miss Grey. Harry shook his head. They can't all be at her office. Besides, today's not a holiday. Why is everyone summoned here for dinner? Something's up. Dumbledore must have an announcement. Ron cast Harry a puzzled look, as if the idea had never occurred to him. Harry clenched his jaw. Ron never did homework, yet still complained about its length. Ron, for his part, pouted. I haven't seen homework a foot long, though. That's outrageous. Focus, Harry muttered. Focus on what? Ron blinked innocently. I don't get it. Harry pressed his lips together. Ron's blank expression was driving him mad. Finally, Ron's eyes darted to the right pocket of Harry's robe. Wait a second, you aren't hiding something in there, are you? Harry blinked. Ron leaned forward, voice low but insistent. You found the Ravenclaw diadem, didn't you? You've got it in your pocket right now, haven't you? Harry sighed and opened his palm to reveal the shimmering diadem. Ron's face went green with envy. Perfect, he muttered sourly. Now Dumbledore will give you some gleaming special award for your so-called contribution. He folded his arms again, looking entirely put out. Harry slipped the diadem back into his pocket. Let him, he said. It's nothing to me. But inside, he wondered just how big Dumbledore's surprise tonight would be, and whether the ghosts were part of it too. Ron sprang to his feet so suddenly that students at every nearby table whirled to stare. He didn't seem to notice or care that a plump gray owl had swooped in toward Percy Weasley's seat. "I could wear that helmet," Ron blurted to Harry, practically bouncing in place. "Why fret over homework when there's something like this on the line?" Harry shot him a warning look. "I can lend it to you," Ron went on, lowering his voice, "but it's not really a helmet. You should at least know the name, Ravenclaw's diadem." He waved a hand impatiently. "Sit down, will you?" Still perched on his feet, Ron caught the impatient glares of everyone around him. He registered their stares for only a moment. That was classic Ron, never one to blush or shrink back. Instead, he spread his arms like a victorious general, surveyed his troops, and finally sat down with a satisfied grin. Leaning close to Harry, he dropped his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "You know, today's Dad's day off. He's expecting a full write-up on our classes. I've already used up most of his good notes. The rest should cover you and the others back in the dorm." Harry just shook his head in disbelief as Ron set about copying everyone's homework. Harry winced. Ron had been broadcasting their private business as loudly as he'd once ranted about Voldemort. If Harry hadn't been on his guard, half the train could already be gossiping about things they'd rather keep under wraps. Even in the narrow confines of a compartment, discretion mattered. "Ron, you really ought to keep it down," Harry admonished, striving for a stern tone while secretly enjoying himself. "If I'd missed it, who knows how far your news would have spread," Ron huffed. "Spread? Everyone needs to know what's going on, just like with you-know-who." "Not every detail," Harry countered, leaning back to hide a triumphant smirk and smoothing the corners of his mouth into a neutral line. "Besides, the Muggle Protection Act just passed. Dad's swamped with paperwork. He probably hasn't even seen your letter yet." Ron's face flushed. He opened his mouth to argue, volume rising by the second, when Harry threw him a warning look. "No matter how busy he is, he reads all our letters," Ron blurted, voice echoing off the compartment walls. "Quiet, both of you." Ginny snapped, lowering the thick tome of standard spells, elementary, she'd been hiding behind. She glared at them, clearly exasperated. "Some of us are trying to study." "Just pretend you don't know me, Ron," Ginny hissed, her eyes flashing. Ron opened his mouth, then shut it again, utterly baffled. "What did I do wrong?" he muttered, crossing his arms. "And it's not like homework is impossible." "Ron, Dumbledore's here," Neville warned him, glancing at the enchanted clock above the staff table. "Dinner starts at 6:30, and it's only 6 o'clock. "So what if Dumbledore's here early?" Ron asked, genuine confusion creasing his brow. "Because you're shouting about your dad's work in the Great Hall," Neville hissed. "Keep it down, will you?" Ron scowled. "Why should I whisper about Father's job? It's public knowledge." Before Neville could answer, Percy's excited voice cut through the tension. "Ron, you heard, didn't you?" He was practically bouncing on his bench, utterly transformed from the stern prefect everyone knew. Fred and George trailed after him, their eyebrows raised in curiosity. "Percy, what's gotten into you?" the twins chorused, sliding in beside him. Percy's grin stretched from ear to ear. "I've never been happier. Miss Bones is the new Minister of Magic." A ripple of astonishment swept the tables. Percy's announcement echoed louder than any owl post. Susan Bones, sitting with her Hufflepuff friends, looked as if she'd been struck by a stunning spell. Around her, younger students clamored, jostling for her attention. "Susan, your aunt's minister," Percy crowed again. "How come you didn't know yet?" Susan blinked, speechless, as the entire Hufflepuff table pressed in, eager for details. The usual chatter of the Great Hall fell away, replaced by the sudden, thrilling realization that everything had just changed. Everyone in the family knew exactly what kind of trouble Fred and George were capable of, especially when it came to anything resembling a dull, 9-to-5 job at the Ministry of Magic. Monotony was their greatest enemy, and the pair dreamt of nothing more than opening a joke shop even more famous than Zonko's once they graduated. Still, it was curious how much they seemed to know about the inner workings of the ministry. After all, the only reason they would have that kind of insider information was that Father worked there. "Percy guessed it, right?" Fred asked with a smirk, and George rolled his eyes in amused agreement. Percy's face went pale with excitement. "No, "You've got it all wrong," he stammered, tears of joy welling up in his eyes. "Father isn't just an ordinary official. He's the director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement." Chapter 94. Heroes of the Order of the Phoenix. Despite his seniority and heroic reputation from the First Wizarding War, Arthur Weasley could never truly measure up, in the eyes of many younger Ministry employees, to the formidable director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. That department was the largest and arguably the most influential division within the British Ministry of Magic. Except for the secretive Department of Mysteries, every other office in the ministry answered to its authority. By contrast, Arthur headed only the tiny office for the prohibition of the misuse of Muggle artifacts, a staff of 2. Although he contributed to drafting new legislation, he remained a marginal figure in the corridors of power. Yet on a quieter day, removed from office politics, Arthur would allow himself the comfortable fantasy that if circumstances were different, he too might sit in that director's chair. After all, few could claim his credentials, a decorated hero of the First Wizarding War and one of the purest-blooded members of the original Order of the Phoenix. His pedigree only reinforced his sense of entitlement. His mother had been a proud Black, and his wife, Molly Pruitt, was the sole direct heir of one of the 28 Sacred 28 families. Molly's 2 brothers had fallen in the fight against Voldemort, martyrs whose sacrifice still resonated in Arthur's heart. With such a lineage and such loyalty to the cause, how could he not believe he belonged among the ministry's top brass? But belief and reality rarely coincided. As Arthur closed his office door and glanced at the stacks of parchment awaiting his approval, he reminded himself that true power often lay in perseverance, not position. And if fate ever delivered him a grander role, he would be more than ready to seize it. One reason Dumbledore never became director of the Department of Magical Law, aside from his own reluctance, was his membership in the Order of the Phoenix. The Order had consistently outperformed the Ministry of Magic in the fight against the Death Eaters, and, unwilling to admit its own failures, the Ministry effectively sidelined him. Yet it was precisely Dumbledore's wartime achievements that gave Arthur Weasley the clout to draft new legislation and establish an entire department in his honor. Today, Weasley occupies the post of Director of Magical Law, and many insiders quietly credit Dumbledore with pulling the strings behind the scenes. Some even whisper that Fudge's resignation was secured at the headmaster's urging. After all, it seems unthinkable that a man who so wholeheartedly supports his followers would not then use his influence to win them the recognition they deserve. Arthur Weasley once played that very game, working backroom favors and stacking up credentials for himself. But Dumbledore is different. Time and again, he has refused every offer of power, declining even to leverage his profound sway for the benefit of his most loyal allies. In a world where ambition often trumps principle, he remains steadfastly above the fray. The war's unsung heroes found themselves forgotten and cast aside. Alastor Mad-Eye Moody, once a celebrated Auror, was branded a lunatic and forced to resign. Remus Lupin sank into desperate poverty, struggling to put food on his table. Dedalodigo loafed away his days in the dim corner of the leaky cauldron, drinking rather than seeking work. Alice and Frank Longbottom, their minds irreparably broken by dark magic, languished in St. Mungo's hospital for magical maladies and injuries. Many others had simply perished. With no family to claim them, their possessions were seized by the ministry. Even Dumbledore seemed to have forgotten that heroes, like anyone else, needed to eat. In the wake of the First Wizarding War, the Order of the Phoenix was disbanded, its members stripped of honor and reward. Into that silence slithered Tom Riddle, quietly reminding the ministry, like the serpent in Eden, that truth can be the most venomous poison. He spoke no lies, yet every word cut deeper than any curse. Watching Percy, once so proud and steadfast, now a hollow echo of his former self, and hearing Riddle's insinuations, Dumbledore found himself gripped by doubt. Had he truly done the right thing? Familiar faces flitted through Dumbledore's thoughts. For the first time, he wondered if he should grasp political power, or at least make sure the true heroes received their due. He possessed the strength, the influence. Perhaps he had been wrong to stay purely above the fray. He exhaled heavily. Seated beside him, Voldemort's lips curved into a triumphant smile. That was the stance a worthy opponent should take. After all, if the Order of the Phoenix refused to disband and instead transformed into a potent political faction within the Ministry of Magic, how could Voldemort ever hope to return? In the audience, Ryan watched them with keen interest. This, he realized, explained why Dumbledore had fallen so easily to Fudge in the original timeline. The headmaster's unwavering nobility demanded that his followers be equally immaculate, so much so that even fighting for one's rightful cause seemed improper. Who would dare speak up for such an aloof leader? Only his most ardent supporters, the ones ready to sacrifice everything for justice. The rest of the wizarding world, ordinary witches and wizards, stayed silent, unwilling to step forward on his behalf. Nearby, the Weasley family exchanged uneasy glances at Percy's remarks. As the old saying went, children from humble beginnings tend to grow up all too quickly. Back when the Weasleys were still a small family living in comfortable harmony, each child found room to chase their own dream. Bill and Charlie set their sights on adventures beyond the burrow, Bill at Gringotts and Charlie among dragons, while Percy, confronted by the family's modest means, buried himself in his books, determined to climb the Ministry of Magic's ranks through sheer effort. Fred and George, meanwhile, plotted one money-making scheme after another, eager to fund their grand entrepreneurial ambitions. Ron struggled to emerge from his older brother's shadows, and little Ginny, the sole daughter, grew up doted on and carefully protected despite the family's limited resources. Now, years later, the entire clan was overflowing with pride. Fred could hardly catch his breath as Percy enveloped him in a bear hug, and George squealed with delight as Ron, taller now by a head, lifted him off his feet. Ginny, ever the tender heart, quietly wrapped her arms around Harry, sharing in his triumph with a bright, affectionate smile. Not far away at the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was clapping so enthusiastically for Harry's well-earned honor that anyone who didn't know better might have sworn he was a Weasley himself. Gregory Goyle, Vincent Crabbe, and even Pansy Parkinson joined in, cheering on Draco's idol. In that moment, the great hall thrummed with applause, lively conversation, and the joyous laughter of Harry and his friends. Proof that no matter how different their paths had been, the bonds of family and friendship had carried them here together. The entire great hall fell into an uneasy silence the moment Percy burst in, brandishing a crumpled parchment above his head. Not a single professor stirred to stop him. Even Professor McGonagall, usually the most severe of them all, only watched with narrowed, almost red-rimmed eyes. Perhaps her positions as deputy headmistress of Hogwarts and head of Gryffindor House, not to mention her place in the Order of the Phoenix, made everyone reluctant to challenge her indifference. It took nearly 10 minutes before the murmur of students and staff died away. Percy, still clutching the letter, straggled back to the Weasley table and collapsed into his seat. Ron and Ginny flanked him, their faces a mixture of concern and curiosity. "How on earth did you know Father had finally been promoted?" Ron demanded in a hushed, hoarse voice. "1 minute you were moaning that you couldn't finish your homework until Dad answered your letter. And the next, you're parading that owl around like you own the place." Ginny rolled her eyes, folding her arms. "I told you already. Its name is Juwagen, Piglet, if you like. It only responds to that. Percy must have called it by name, and of course it came straight to him with Dad's reply." Ron gaped. "So it wasn't you shouting, 'Owl, come here,' at the top of your lungs?" Ginny shot him a look of mild exasperation. "Honestly, you're almost as clueless as the rest of them. The moment the owl recognized Piglet, it soared off and delivered Father's letter to Percy. That's why he got it first." Percy unfolded the parchment eagerly and cleared his throat, ready to read it aloud, only to catch Ginny rolling her eyes again. She whispered under her breath, "I still don't get why you named the thing Piglet anyway." The rest of the table leaned in. Ginny sighed, a gentle smile tugging at her lips. "Because when it arrived, it was so round-faced and soft-feathered, it reminded me of a little piglet. I was too shy to give it any other name. After all, it was Sirius's owl, not mine. But it suits him." Ron shook his head, half laughing. "Right. Well, I suppose if Mum's going to be safe and happy at the Ministry now that Dad's been promoted, there's nothing to complain about." Ginny shrugged. Even with his new position, Dad's still head over heels for everything Muggle. He'd never intentionally forget one of my letters. I'm just glad Piglet did his job. Percy grinned and broke the seal on the envelope. As he unfolded the creamy parchment, the tension at the table eased at last. For the Weasleys, an ordinary family meal in the Great Hall resumed, albeit with one more bright secret tucked into Percy's pocket. It must be in that letter to Percy, Ron muttered to himself. He probably bolted the moment he'd read half of it. Just as Ron turned to dash across the hall toward the Gryffindor table, Professor Dumbledore rose quietly to his feet, his piercing eyes sweeping the room. Chapter 95, The Ghostly Banquet. Now, you might all be wondering why we decided to hold this banquet on the very first evening of term, Dumbledore began, surveying the assembled students with a twinkle in his eye. On stage, just moments ago, I heard every theory under the sun. Some of you suggested it was so we could honor Harry Potter with a special commendation. Others thought it was to officially welcome our new Minister of Magic, Amelia Bones, and a few of you even claimed the true reason was that I'd chased every last ghost out of Hogwarts. A mischievous wink accompanied the headmaster's words, and an immediate chorus of boos rose from the crowd. Dumbledore let the jeers settle before continuing. I'm afraid you've all missed the mark. He swept his gaze toward the house tables. Most of his attention lingered on the red and gold of Gryffindor, which appeared unusually full this evening. Oddly enough, he said, the most spirited table tonight is not chaired by Fred and George. We all know they're more given to mischief than motivation. Instead, Gryffindor's own prefect Percy Weasley sits at its head. A ripple of surprise echoed through the hall. Percy, long regarded by his housemates as rigid and frankly insufferable, had always been something of an outsider in his own house. How, you ask, did Percy earn such an honor? Dumbledore leaned forward, his voice dropping conspiratorially. It isn't his stellar grades, his unyielding Gryffindor loyalty, nor even the professor's respect that secured him this place. No, there's another reason, and that reason is known only to me. He paused, letting the suspense build. Even the other professors on the dais exchanged curious glances. Enjoy your feast, Dumbledore concluded, and perhaps by dessert I shall share with you the real reason Percy Weasley has risen to lead Gryffindor tonight. With that, the enchanted candles atop the long tables flared brighter, and the feast was officially underway, leaving every student eager for the secret behind Percy's sudden elevation. Professor Flitwick was the first to react. He'd practically vaulted from his seat in the headmaster's office to shake my hand, thanking me for awarding Harry the Special Contribution Award. Yet now, at tonight's feast, he sat awkwardly nursing a glass of sherry, as though he hadn't heard a word spoken. Beside him sat Professors McGonagall, Sprout, and Snape, each doing their utmost to keep a straight face. Still, the slight upturn of their lips betrayed them. Minerva managed the steadiest poker face, her lips hardly moved, but the faint crow's feet at the corners of her eyes were proof enough of her private delight. Of course, they'd been celebrating a little too soon. All three had quietly suggested I honor Harry, but without adding a single house point. So when I announced that the award would indeed carry full points, their smiles faded like a tide going out. They'd completely misread my intentions this evening. Harry Potter, though, had earned every bit of it. When the Ravenclaw table rose in cheers, louder than any other house, their approval echoed the rest of the hall. Tonight, at least, justice had been served. Gryffindor was called next, and as expected, Slytherin came in dead last. Their applause was the weakest of all, yet thanks to Draco Malfoy and his inner circle, the noise level wasn't all that far behind Ravenclaw's cheer. In fact, Draco's shrill woo betrayed an unexpected knack for high-pitched singing. Then the great hall fell into an almost painful silence. Every student, and even a few self-conscious professors, turned to Albus Dumbledore, who stood at the front like some very merry talk show host. He beamed at them for a moment, then let out a chuckle. It's a pity we don't have a special contribution trophy this year, he began, pausing just long enough to make everyone lean forward. Otherwise, I'd award it to one very deserving individual. Murmurs rippled through the hall, but Dumbledore raised a finger and continued. However, I can still give points where they're due. Harry, for your extraordinary bravery tonight. A hush fell. I award 20 points to Ravenclaw. The hall erupted. Ravenclaw students leapt to their feet, professors exchanged proud smiles, and even a few Slytherins looked genuinely surprised. Dumbledore waved a hand as though brushing aside any further question. I suppose Professors Snape, McGonagall, Sprout, and yes, even Professor Flitwick might feel a bit disappointed not to receive a special contribution award themselves. But really, Harry deserves 100 of them, and 100 points to match. Yet he's already claimed the greatest reward of all, the Ravenclaw crown. With that, Dumbledore sat down to roaring applause, and the house tables burst into celebration. Even Draco Malfoy's high notes couldn't outshine the cheers, this time all for Ravenclaw. At the sound of Dumbledore's final words, the great hall erupted in thunderous applause. He raised a pale hand, smiling. Thank you. Please, settle down. I know what you're thinking. Here he goes again, playing favorites with Mr. Potter. But that isn't the case, and I certainly haven't quietly handed over Hogwarts property to anyone. He paced slowly between the long tables. What you may not realize is that Ravenclaw House has no living heirs. No one but one remarkable young woman holds the legal claim to the lost diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw. Miss Grey, a tall, dark-haired witch seated just a few tables away, is the last direct descendant of our illustrious founder. Many of you know that when Harry assisted in recovering the diadem, Miss Grey graciously acknowledged his role and decided he deserved to wear it today. A murmur rippled through the students and professors, and Dumbledore gave a gentle nod. This evening's banquet, you'll recall, connects directly to this morning's curious event in the Ravenclaw Common Room, an event you might say was crown-related. Naturally, I can't resist a little mystery, so forgive my usual riddling ways. I see eager first-years craning their necks. I remember well your first feasts here, but do hold your questions for later. He turned to Miss Grey, whose pale blue eyes met his with a mixture of pride and excitement. With her guidance, and a modest assist from yours truly, I've succeeded in mastering the enchantment that allows the diadem to appear only when the rightful heir deems it worthy. And now Miss Grey invites Mr. Potter to don it, if he so chooses. Cheers broke out again as Harry rose and approached the empty podium. Moments later, a faint, silvery glow coalesced into a delicate, ethereal crown atop his head, proof that, when tradition meets teamwork, even the oldest magic can find new life. Dumbledore paused, letting a ripple of astonished chatter fill the great hall. Professors exchanged bemused glances, and students whispered furiously among themselves. Did he really say ghosts can use wands now? Someone murmured. Can they even eat? Or, go to the bathroom? A nervous giggle ran through the crowd. And what about, could they pursue Miss Grey? Clearing his throat, Dumbledore offered a wry smile. Your guesses are certainly imaginative, but there's more to Ravenclaw magic than meets the eye. I have discovered a spell that temporarily transforms non-magical, inanimate objects into ghost-like entities. Unfortunately, it only works on food, and only for a limited time. So yes, tonight you will dine alongside ghosts, and your meal will be quite literally ghostly. He swept his wand in a graceful arc and sat back. Instantly, the long dining tables shimmered to life. Golden platters appeared, piled high with sumptuous dishes of every hue. Floating candles bobbed overhead, casting a warm, flickering glow. Beside them hovered translucent, pearl-white tables laden with ethereal versions of the same fare. Delicate, shimmering morsels that looked as though spun from moonlight. From every alcove and corridor, Hogwarts's ghosts drifted forth, their pale forms gliding toward the banquet. They took their places alongs, i.e. the enchanted tables, ready to enjoy a feast that was, in every sense of the word, to die for. The ghosts all beamed with delight as they drifted among the long tables of the great hall. Sir Nicholas, called the fat friar, his kindly voice echoing off the stone walls, mind where you're going. But the headless ghost was too enthusiastic to heed the warning. As he swept past a carving station, a slab of steak slipped from his marbled neck and fell, spectacularly, right through his phantom body and into the floor below. It's freezing! Seamus Finnegan exclaimed, pausing mid-munch. His hand was still stuffed with chunks of steaming meat, yet now he found himself holding a cold, translucent slice on his plate where none had been moments before. It's dinner, Sir Nicholas called up, popping his headless torso through a crack in the floorboards at Seamus's feet. "Forgive me. I'm not used to such gravity." Seamus raised an eyebrow, then shrugged and returned to his feast. Around them, the other ghosts had abandoned all their usual refinement. They snatched bread, cheese, and roast meat as though it were solid fare, washing it down with goblets of wine that shimmered mysteriously in their ethereal hands. Even the bloody Baron, the stern, silent sentinel of Slytherin House, had forsaken his usual restraint. He sat alone at the end of the green-striped table in the corridor, sipping an odd, dark wine and surveying the revelry with a faintly sour expression. Sir Nicholas, thrilled to see his fellow spectres so animated, drifted off to join the crowd. The fat friar shrugged at Seamus, who simply grinned and took another bite of that unearthly steak. Curious, it tasted just like roast beef, only a bit chilly. And in the glow of floating candles overhead, the ghosts of Hogwarts celebrated the night with a clap of laughter that rattled the ancient windows. Chapter 96. The War Sparked by the Death Anniversary Dinner. "Nick, where's the Grey Lady?" Harry asked, watching nearly headless Nick fumble with his food. The ghost was gingerly guiding a spoonful of soup toward his translucent mouth, but no matter how careful he was, glistening drops kept seeping through the stone floor and vanishing into the earth below. Nick, a whirlwind of energy among Hogwarts' spectres, second only to the Bloody Baron, scowled. He disliked any kind of commotion, and this noisy banquet was clearly testing his patience. On top of that, he'd gone a millennium without eating. He was mortified at the idea of poor table manners in front of everyone. He swallowed a dry mouthful of pie crust with a forced gulp and muttered, "She probably doesn't want to be seen eating. After all, she's a lady and, well, she hasn't eaten for thousands of years. She'd never manage proper decorum." "Maybe you should try a drink," Ron suggested, scooping more potatoes onto his plate. "Watch and learn," Nick snapped. He gripped his spectral left ear and gave it a tug. His head tipped forward on an imaginary hinge, sliding to rest crookedly on his shoulders. Then, with an eerie creak, his jaw swung open. A splash of ghostly gravy arced through the air, drenching everyone within range. Seamus yelped, wiping slick residue off his robes. "Ugh!" he groaned, as groans and sputters rippled down the length of the table. Harry and Ron exchanged exasperated looks. They'd come to honor the death anniversary of a fallen student, not to wage a culinary battle against Hogwarts' hungriest ghost. Yet here they were, soaked in ectoplasm, and utterly and predictably caught in the middle of nearly headless Nick's dining disaster. Lisa Dupin was so captivated by Riddle at the staff table that she didn't notice the drifting ghost food until it was already sliding into her mouth. With a silent pop, it passed right through her and left a small, shimmering residue on the marble floor. "Watch out, Nick," Ron blurted, lunging to shield his roast chicken. He slammed his hand down, and of course, the ethereal food simply sank through his fingers, through the meat on his plate, and into the stone beneath. Harry brushed at his chest as a sliver of ectoplasm whizzed perilously close to his hairline. Thanks to the quick reflexes of Hogwarts' youngest seeker, he jerked aside at the last second. Dean, however, remained blissfully unaware. The ghostly crumbs slipped through his hair as if scattering glitter on his robes. Nick, nearly headless but undaunted, reached out to catch the wayward morsel, but in his haste, he lost control. The sticky residue rebounded off his transparent crown and spiraled outward, plastering itself on nearby tables. Even Draco Malfoy, perched smugly at the far Slytherin bench, felt the cold, slimy dot against his sleeve. An angry hush fell over the great hall. All eyes turned to Nick. His pale, expressionless face took on a hint of wounded pride. He had always considered himself the most refined and elegant of Hogwarts ghosts. Now, with a faint sigh, he hovered back a little further from the tables, determined to maintain whatever dignity he had left. At first glance, Nick could have been mistaken for nothing more than a well-dressed English aristocrat. A feather-plumed hat perched on his long, curly hair, and a knee-length tunic framed by an elaborate, wheel-shaped ruff that cleverly hid the ghastly truth. His neck was nearly severed. Harry stared at him, concern shadowing his green eyes. "Are you all right?" Nearly headless Nick gave a graceful, if pale, wave of his slender hand. "Oh, it's nothing, really. Just a small oversight on my part. I thought I could manage by avoiding juicy foods, no red meat, no wine, but I completely forgot about my neck. Though his tone was breezy, Nick's features twisted in pain. Suddenly, he exploded in frustration. Why must I be so unlucky? First, I endure 44 blows from a blunt axe, and somehow I'm still barely hanging on, so I can't join the Headless Hunters. And now, I can't even enjoy a decent glass of claret or a juicy steak without agony. Harry's eyebrows shot up. You can't join the Headless Hunters because your head isn't fully detached? You still have skin and sinew holding it together? Before Nick could answer, Ron gave Harry a sharp nudge in the ribs. Oi, mate, he scolded quietly. That was a bit much, even for you. Harry chuckled. Most folks would say what I did is as good as chopping off my own head, but not Mr. Neo DeBomo, the real headless fellow, who insists it's still not enough. Nick didn't seem to mind Harry's teasing. In fact, he was lost in memories of being rejected again and again when he petitioned the Headless Hunters. Harry grinned. Really, you're in a better shape than Mr. DeBomo. Your neck's still in one piece, and I'll bet you can eat circles around him. Why didn't I think of that? Nick exclaimed, eyes brightening. I could invite him to my death day party. He hovered in the air for a moment, then abruptly straightened, puffed out his chest, and assumed a regal air. This Halloween is my 500th birthday, he announced grandly. I'm throwing a celebration in that huge classroom beneath the castle. Guests are traveling in from all corners of the country. It would be my honor if you attended, and you'd get front row seats to watch the Headless Hunters gorge themselves and get absolutely drenched. Nick's grin turned a little sheepish. Of course, Mr. Weasley and Mr. Malfoy always steal the show, but I'm betting you'd rather go to the school banquet, right? He fixed Harry with a hopeful look. Harry's famous in both the wizarding world and the ghost world, Sir Nicholas said, floating alongside Harry with an eager gleam in his translucent eyes. If anyone tried to make a fool of himself in front of you, DeBomo and the others wouldn't dare laugh. Heh! All right, I'll go. What about you, Ron? Ron exchanged a quick look with Harry, then shrugged and grinned. Why not? Not many people our age can say they've been invited to a ghost's death day party. We're going too, Ron declared, and Ginny, Neville, and the others who'd been listening rushed forward. Of course we are. How could we miss it? Ginny said. Absolutely. The more the merrier. Sir Nicholas flitted around them in excitement. A short distance away, Ryan turned to Hermione. Aren't you curious? Come with us. Hermione shook her head. Honestly, you're all being ridiculous. I know about death day parties. Ghosts hold them down in the dungeons where they can't eat. All you get is a whiff of rotten food piled on decaying platters. She gave a small smile. But this one's different. Nick's applying to use the Great Hall on Halloween night. I'll bet Dumbledore approves. After all, what would Halloween be without ghosts? Hermione lifted her chin proudly. I think you've overlooked one thing, she said. There'll be dozens of ghosts at nearly headless Nick's death day party. With that many spirits floating around, it'll be freezing. I bet Professor Dumbledore will have them use some basement rooms. From the side, Luna Lovegood spoke up softly. Not at all. Your guess is about as reliable as those nymph hooks you keep mentioning. Hermione frowned. Luna met her gaze unflinchingly, and Ryan noticed something flash in Luna's usually misty eyes the moment Hermione brought up nymph hooks. Actually, nymph hooks do exist, Luna continued, enunciating every word. They often grow in mistletoe and resemble maggots, except they're thicker and jet black. Fully grown adults have around 5,000 teeth, while juveniles have about 3,000. Each one bears a sickle-shaped hook on its tail and 3 small eyes, and their lifespan is roughly 20 years. Chapter 97. The delicious food discovered by Myrtle, Hermione, and Luna were at it again, trading sharp words across the common room, and Ryan didn't find it the least bit surprising. Hermione, ever the rationalist, put her faith squarely in books. Even after countless training sessions with Ryan, she'd simply transferred her trust from dusty tomes to his own carefully honed magical teachings. Deep down, she remained a methodical scholar, more comfortable with proven theory than flighty speculation. Luna stood in stark contrast. Guided by her emotions and a boundless imagination, she delighted in playing with every notion, no matter how fantastic. Graced with a razor-sharp intellect beneath her dreamy exterior, she believed wholeheartedly in creatures and forces that most considered purely mythical. In an age when magic still gleamed with raw potential, Luna's inventive spirit would have earned her accolades far beyond any classroom honors. That fundamental difference in outlook, Hermione's strict adherence to established rules versus Luna's talent for bending reality through creative leaps, had created an unbridgeable rift between them. And with Ryan caught squarely in the middle, it was only natural that tensions would flare. Ryan watched their argument unfold, his face registering equal parts amusement and exasperation. Two of the brightest witches he knew, locked in a battle of logic versus imagination, while he stood by as the unintentional spark. Any moment now, he suspected, someone would have to step in and break up the feud, before yet another flying quill or carelessly flung textbook did more damage than magic ever could. Why couldn't Hermione and Luna develop the same deep bond that Penelope and Kate shared? Ryan had never even considered granting them equal access to his mind. The sheer mental bandwidth required to link all four women at once would drain far more energy than he cared to expend. Even if constant conversation with four companions sounded tempting, he wasn't prepared to shoulder that commitment. He'd already learned the hard way. In his youthful naivete, he'd once laid bare his thoughts to Kate and Penelope, and ever since the start of term, they'd taken up near constant residence in his psyche. Their bodies moved and spoke on their own subconscious autopilot, with Ryan's subtle guidance steering them when needed. No wonder they never complained about his wandering affections. From their vantage point, he'd been by their side every waking moment since arriving at Hogwarts. Suddenly, a familiar, mocking gaze settled on him. Harry Potter stood just beyond the crowd, lips curled into a teasing smirk. In that instant, Ryan couldn't shake the thought. Had he been too generous after all? Harry had been happily helping nearly headless Nick plan the upcoming Death Day dinner when he ran headlong into his worst nightmare that very evening. Moaning Myrtle. My name is Myrtle Elizabeth Warren. I'm a Muggle-born witch. My parents are both Muggles, yet I like to think my brains are all my own. If you'd asked me back then what my happiest days were, I'd have told you they belonged to my childhood before Hogwarts ever entered my life. At home, nestled under my quilt, I could devour books by flashlight with no one to laugh at my thick glasses. My skin was clear, my hair untamed, and I had neither pimples nor puberty's awkwardness cloaking my reflection. I was cute, I was clever, and I was popular. Well, among my Muggle classmates at least. Everything changed on my 11th birthday, when an unexpected letter arrived. I was a witch. I could learn magic. I would go to Hogwarts. I wish I'd known then that being Muggle-born carried its own burdens. Once sorted into Ravenclaw, I discovered a different kind of struggle, the subtle, cutting prejudice against those of us with Muggle blood. I also found my personal tormentor, Olive Hornby. From the moment we met, she made it her mission to embarrass me, bully me, and remind me at every turn that I didn't quite belong. That was the life I carried with me through the castle. Alls each day, haunted by my own insecurities, and, later, by the bathroom ghost I became. But for now, as Harry Potter shrank back in sheer dismay, Myrtle was very much alive, and all too eager to introduce herself. Ravenclaw was supposed to be my sanctuary, a house full of bright minds who valued wit and learning. Instead, my confidence unraveled the moment Olive Hornby set her sights on me. First came my stress eating, then the frantic late-night study sessions, desperate to prove I belonged. All that cramming gifted me with angry red acne and glasses so thick I might as well have been a four-eyed owl. Olive Hornby, far from satisfied, pulled her friends into a clique that made a point of excluding me. No one at Hogwarts paid me any mind, except her, snickering behind her perfectly poised curls. By third year, I couldn't hold back the tears any longer. After Olive Hornby mocked my glasses again, calling me a four-eyed dog, I fled to the second-floor girls' bathroom. Hunched in a stall, I sobbed quietly until my shoulders shook so hard I thought I'd break. The castle was empty until I heard the door creak open. A voice spilled into the room, speaking words I didn't recognize, definitely not English. And the tone, it was unmistakably male. My heart leapt. A boy in the girls' bathroom? Fury and mortification surged at once. Blurring the stalls with my tears, I flung open the door and shouted, "This is the girls' bathroom! Get out of here!" My voice echoed off the tiles, and then I died of embarrassment. I only remember one thing from the moment I died, a pair of enormous, yellow eyes staring back at me. After that, it was as if I'd simply vanished. Nobody at school even noticed I was missing. No whispers, no rumors, not a soul asking where I'd gone. It took weeks before anyone finally remembered I existed. The first person to track me down was Olive Hornby. I'll never forget her reaction when she realized I'd been haunting the bathroom all along. She burst in, flustered. "Professor Dippet told me to look for you. Are you sulking down here again, Myrtle?" I nearly burst out laughing. If only she'd known she was addressing a ghost. I hovered above her, pale and dripping, until her scream echoed off the walls. Her face, pale, horrified, eyes wide, was worth every ounce of effort. Meeting my parents again was a close second in the best days ever category. I drifted into their kitchen one morning, unveiled my ghostly form, and watched their jaws drop. Suddenly, I was alive again. Sort of. Their relief made me beam. From that day on, I tailed Olive everywhere, reminding her, and anyone else who'd listen, that it was her toothbrush I'd been hovering over when I died. The look of terror on her face? Priceless. Soon the other students treated her exactly the way they'd treated me, with whispers and wary glances. Then came the ultimate stunt, crashing Olive's brother's wedding. Let's just say it got ugly. I regret pushing her that far. In retaliation, she went straight to the Ministry of Magic. Now I'm stuck haunting Hogwarts by official decree. Oh well, if I have to be a ghost, I might as well be the most notorious one on campus. It's almost pathetic. I'd planned to haunt these bathrooms until I finally, well, died. Of course, that made no sense, since I'm already dead. In all honesty, life at Hogwarts as a ghost has been drearier than when I was alive. No more endless feasts to vent my frustrations, no more comfort food at all, and every time Peeves swoops in to call me fat and ugly, I seriously consider calling it quits. But what's the point? I'm already a spirit. Over the years, my misery earned me the nickname Moaning Myrtle. I resigned myself to a stinky, stagnant eternity in the second-floor girls' bathroom, until today. For the first time since my untimely demise, I can taste again. I drifted out of my stall, my little realm of sorrow, and stepped into the corridor, not expecting any miracles. Yet there, standing right before me, I found something infinitely more delectable than any chocolate frog or pumpkin pasty. Harry Potter himself. Chapter 100. Optimistic Lupin. The Quidditch tryouts went off without a hitch. Since Captain Henry had already narrowed down the squad last year, anyone who'd made it this far was a proven flyer. By the end of the drills, fifth-year Richard House, steady, sharp-eyed, and fearless, claimed the keeper's perch. Bradley Jones, a sturdy third-year with a reliable bat swing, took one of the beater spots. The seeker position remained contested between Phoenix and Roger, though Roger Chambers, despite his daring dives, had proven too erratic and was named only as a substitute. He grumbled openly, but the rest of the players were too drained to pay him much mind. After a final cool-down, the dozen or so hopefuls trudged back toward the castle, fatigue heavy on their shoulders. As they rounded a bend in the path, Ron froze mid-stride and pointed. "Look, there's Lupin." Harry glanced where Ron was pointing and saw Professor Lupin deep in heated discussion with Hagrid by the gamekeeper's hut. They couldn't make out the words, but Hagrid's booming voice and Lupin's calm, upward-tilted chin spoke volumes about the intensity of their argument. Harry surveyed the line of tired students behind him. "Roger," he said, "take everyone back to the castle. Ron and I will go on ahead." Roger nodded and ushered the other players away. Harry and Ron broke into a hurried jog across the lawn, keen to discover what had set Hagrid off. Even from a distance, Hagrid's voice boomed. "Aragog and the others aren't dangerous, they're centaurs." By the time Harry and Ron reached the clearing, Hagrid's face was a storm of frustration, while Lupin's composed features had hardened into quiet resolve. Before they could speak, Hagrid thundered, "Hey, you two, get over here!" Exchanging a worried look, Harry and Ron hurried up. Whatever was brewing between the gentle giant and the werewolf professor, it was serious, and they were right in the middle of it. A booming voice cut through the wood smoke and chatter. Harry, Ron, and Hermione turned to see Hagrid striding toward them across the clearing, his enormous frame wrapped in a flour-spattered apron and cradling a sack of potatoes. At his side padded Fang, his shaggy boarhound, who let out a low growl as they approached. "Shoo now, Fang!" Hagrid barked over his shoulder. The dog obeyed at once, tail wagging so vigorously it seemed it might sweep everyone off their feet. Fang bounded forward and began licking Harry's and Ron's ears in an over-enthusiastic greeting. Harry half-stepped back. "Careful, it'll bite your fingers off if you startle it." Hagrid, still eyeing Remus Lupin with thinly veiled resentment, set down his sack. "Good to see ye lot," he said gruffly, then spun on Lupin. "But that's not the task Dumbledore set you, is it? You're wrong to be sniffing around in the Spider's Grove." Lupin raised an eyebrow. "Hagrid, it's not Aragog or his." "Who's Aragog?" Hermione blurted, stepping closer. Ron and Harry murmured in agreement. Lupin sighed. "Aragog's an acromantula, Hagrid's old pet. The rest are its family. Recently, the centaurs complained there were too many of them, so none will go hunting alone near that part of the forest." "They're harmless little brats," Hagrid rumbled, folding his arms. "I've seen 'em promise they won't bother centaurs or young witches and wizards." Lupin's lips twitched. "Little brats?" "Hagrid, acromantulas are classified as XXXX level creatures, known to attack and even kill humans, impossible to train or domesticate." He emphasized the final point as though it pained him to say it. Ron's voice quavered. But I raised Aragog from an egg, remember?" Hagrid's shoulders sagged. "Aye, Ron, so did I, but they're still wild creatures. Dumbledore thought it best Lupin check on them, and I'm to help him, not get in his way." The three students exchanged uneasy glances. Neither side seemed willing to yield, and Fang, oblivious to heated words, began nosing eagerly at the potato sack. Hermione stepped between the two friends. "Perhaps there's a compromise," she said gently. "Lupin's only doing what he was asked, just to make sure the colony isn't endangering anyone. And Hagrid, we know how much you care for Aragog." Hagrid ruffled Fang's ears and cast an apologetic look at Lupin. All right, I'll help you, quietly." Lupin nodded. "Thank you, Hagrid. Dumbledore would approve." He offered a small, relieved smile. Hagrid rolled his eyes but managed a grin as he hefted potatoes back into his bag. "Next time, though, warn me before you start poking into Spider Alley, will ye?" And with that, the tension eased. Fang bounded ahead as the trio and their two guardians set off toward the edge of the forest. Potatoes in one hand, purpose in their hearts, and the echo of distant clicking legs awaiting them under the moonlit canopy. Hagrid shoved another forkful of roasted potatoes into the firelight, his beetle-black eyes fixed on Lupin. Across the clearing, Ron stood frozen as the two men sparred. "Hagrid," Lupin began, his tone low and urgent, "I know you raised Aragog yourself, but what about his wife, Mozag, and their thousands of offspring?" Hagrid waved a tight hand. "Aragog's their king," Lupin pressed on, "and acromantulas take orders from their head of the colony. Once Aragog's gone, he's pushing 50 after all. What makes you so sure his children won't turn on us? Imagine thousands of elephant-sized spiders descending on Hogwarts for human flesh. Someone's got to think of the students." Hagrid snorted. "You're overthinking it, Moony. They've had plenty of chances to attack, and no wizard, no centaur, not a soul's been harmed in all these years. They're practically vegetarians." "But that's only because Aragog kept them in line," Lupin countered, leaning forward. "Once he dies, who's to keep the peace? You remember the frenzy of a hungry colony. I passed right through a nest of them last year," Ron blurted, stepping back until his knees hit a log, his face drained of color. I didn't even see them." Lupin exchanged a look with Hagrid, his expression grave. "Exactly what I'm afraid of, Ron." Hagrid dropped his fork and stood, frustration flickering across his face. The night air felt suddenly colder, and the distant rustle of leaves a reminder that the Forbidden Forest was never truly silent. Both men knew there could be no guarantees, only the uneasy truce that had held as long as Aragog lived. And that, they all realized, might not last forever. When Harry at last told Professor Lupin that the hooded figure they'd seen in the Forbidden Forest was Lord Voldemort himself, Lupin barely blinked. "That's your question?" he said, sounding almost bored. "You'd be better off asking Dumbledore about this. Or," he turned to Hagrid, "you could raise another acromantula, train it properly, just so long as it's one Aragog himself recognizes as his heir." Harry stared at them both. Acromantulas were deadly to any ordinary witch or wizard, but if Dumbledore chose to deal with one, Harry was sure he'd have a dozen clever ways to control or banish it. "All right," he said softly. "I'll go ask Dumbledore." "No, wait," Lupin said, standing up. "I'll go talk to Aragog myself and see what he thinks." Harry shook his head. "I don't believe we can hide any of this from Dumbledore. He must already know, and if he hasn't issued orders, then he doesn't think they're necessary." Hagrid cut in, voice firm. "Lupin, you do exactly what Dumbledore asks. Nothing more, nothing less." He gave Lupin a hard look that silenced him at once. Harry leaned forward. "Professor Lupin, then, what has Dumbledore asked you to do?" Ron's face went pale, but Lupin met Harry's eyes steadily. "He wants me to open channels with the werewolf community." He paused, then added quietly, "You're all aware that I'm a werewolf, and as you know, most of my kind have sided with Voldemort." Hagrid's voice shot up in triumph. "Aha! So you admit it, then?" Lupin only nodded. Around them, the forest seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting to see whether old loyalties could be bent toward a new and very dangerous alliance. "Remus," Lupin leaned back in his chair, speaking in an easy, relaxed tone. "You know that most werewolves live on society's margins, poaching for food, sometimes even turning violent. But there's another pack deep in the Forbidden Forest. They keep to themselves and remain neutral in most conflicts." Hagrid's massive frame stiffened. He ruffled his tangled beard and scowled. "Hey, do you really think that's something we ought to tell the students?" Lupin waved a hand, unfazed. "They're already suspicious. Everyone knows Riddle is tied to Voldemort, and Dumbledore's been more on edge than usual. He's convinced that Professor Riddle's presence will push Voldemort into open war, so he's been reshuffling things at the Ministry and here at Hogwarts." "How so?" Hagrid asked, eyebrows knitting together. "Well," Lupin continued, "Dumbledore quietly sidelined those who always took credit for others' successes and promoted the true heroes, people like James Potter, your old friend Ron Weasley. Now the Ministry is packed with our allies. Even inside the school, Voldemort's adherents are thin on the ground. Malfoy's circle has defected to our side. And of course, there's Harry himself. You, the boy who's bested Voldemort more times than anyone can count." He paused, a hint of pride in his voice. "With such strength behind us, I honestly can't imagine us losing this war, which is why I finally have the luxury to look into those other magical creatures, the centaurs, the giant spiders." Lupin sighed, a contented expression settling over him. "I suppose that's my next project." News of Voldemort's possible return had all of them on edge, so much so that Harry decided it was high time to change the subject. "All right, enough about you-know-who," Harry said, offering Hagrid a reassuring smile. "Let's talk about something else for a change." Hagrid blinked and gave a nervous chuckle, clearly still rattled by the very idea of Voldemort coming back. "Aye, right you are, Harry." Harry turned to Ron. "Speaking of magical creatures, Ron, how did you get so clued up on acromantulas?" Ron shot Harry a wary look, then realized Hagrid was listening and reddened. Well, I'm not exactly big on spiders, see?" Harry raised an eyebrow. "You sounded like an expert during Care of Magical Creatures." Ron shifted in his seat. I just did some extra reading, all right? Didn't want to make a fool of myself." "You've always been more of a, let's say, reluctant scholar in Snape's class," Harry teased. Ron groaned. "Don't remind me. Potter, you remember last term when Snape brought in those dead spiders for the potions assignment?" Harry's eyes widened. "They were dead, and you nearly passed out." Ron waved a hand as if brushing away a particularly large, invisible spider. "Doesn't matter. Spiders are spiders. Living or dead, they give me the creeps." Hagrid couldn't help but laugh, the sound warm and rolling. The tension in the hut eased for the first time that evening, and for a moment they all savored the relief of lighter conversation.